Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. The rumble of my old Chevy pickup nearly drowned out the country station playing low on the radio as I bounced along the winding dirt road that stretched away from my hometown of Cody, Wyoming. I was heading deep into the countryside, toward my boyfriend's ranch on the outskirts of Red Hollow, Montana. My two cattle dogs sat beside me, their sharp eyes darting toward every shadow outside the truck windows. They were always alert, but tonight, their intensity was unsettling. This was my first weekend staying at my boyfriend's ranch since we'd started dating, and while I told myself the nerves were normal, something about the quiet stretch of land made my stomach tighten. After nearly an hour of driving, the road dipped down into a wide, open meadow, and then I saw it, the house. A weathered two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeling at the edges, stood surrounded by towering cottonwoods. The porch light flickered, barely pushing back the heavy dusk. An old windmill groaned somewhere in the distance, the rusted blades screeching against the silence. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie. As soon as I stepped out of the truck, a sudden chill slid down my spine, raising goosebumps along my arms. The feeling passed just as quickly as it had come, and I shook it off, ushering my dogs inside. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, warmth returned. My boyfriend and a few of his friends were gathered around the wooden table, playing cards and finishing up dinner. The evening was comfortable, filled with laughter and stories. By the time the last of his friends had left, exhaustion weighed on me, but an unease had settled in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I must have eventually dozed off because the next thing I knew, my little border Aussie mix jolted me awake with 3 sharp barks. My heart pounded as I groggily turned over and muttered for her to settle down. She obeyed but let out a low, uneasy growl that rumbled in the dark. My boyfriend slept soundly beside me, undisturbed, while I lay there staring at the ceiling. At some point I drifted off again, only to slip into a dream. In my dream, I left the bedroom and stepped into the living room. The air felt thick, charged. Sitting in the worn recliner near the fireplace was an older man. He was broad-shouldered but looked frail, the weight of sickness carved into his sunken features. His hands were rough and calloused, his clothes simple but neatly pressed, the way a rancher might have kept them years ago. His dark, hollow eyes locked onto mine. He said nothing, just sat there watching me. When morning came, I couldn't shake the dream. As my boyfriend and I tackled morning chores, I hesitated before asking, "Who lived in the house before you?" He barely looked up as he answered, "My grandpa. He passed away years ago, right in that chair in the living room." I stopped cold, my breath caught in my throat. The blue recliner. That made him glance at me. "Yeah? Why?" With a rush of words, I told him about my dream, describing the man in perfect detail. But he only shrugged and said with a small smirk, "Yeah, Grandpa's still around, just keeping an eye on things." Over the next few months, the strange occurrences continued, faint noises in empty rooms, shifting shadows, objects moving without explanation. At first, the dogs still growled at unseen things in the dark, but eventually they too stopped reacting. It all became part of the rhythm of life in the house. Just Grandpa, watching over the place. For anyone who has ever stood beneath the vast sky of the Montana plains, they know the feeling, the weight of history, the quiet sorrow of those who fought against the land, and the deep-rooted love of those who never wanted to leave it. Some people dream of escaping the emptiness, of leaving behind the rugged, wind-swept fields. But others, like Grandpa, never really leave at all. It was about 4 years ago when this happened. I had just moved to Pennsylvania with my then-girlfriend, Lisa, hoping for a fresh start. Money was tight, so we stayed with my mom in her new apartment in a quiet, older neighborhood on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. The building had to be close to 100 years old, with creaky wooden floors and dimly lit hallways that always smelled faintly of dust and something else, something musty, almost like old books left to rot. It was a one-bedroom apartment, which meant Lisa and I had to make do with an air mattress in the living room while my mom took the bedroom. The setup wasn't ideal, but it was temporary. At least that's what we told ourselves. For the first few months, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, little by little, strange things started happening. The first time, I had just laid down for the night. Lisa was already asleep beside me, her slow, steady breathing filling the quiet room. I've always had trouble falling asleep, so I lay there, eyes shut, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. That's when I heard it, breathing, but not Lisa's. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. A slow inhale, a drawn-out exhale, right behind me. I turned onto my back, expecting to see Lisa awake, but she was motionless, lost in sleep. The breathing came again, closer this time. I whispered, "Lisa, why are you breathing so hard?" She didn't answer. I sat up, my heart hammering. I scanned the darkened room, my eyes struggling to adjust. Nothing. The shadows along the walls didn't shift. Nothing moved. I forced myself to check on my mom, quietly cracking the door to her room. She was snoring softly, completely undisturbed. I told myself it had been my imagination, maybe some trick of the mind when exhaustion settled in. Still, I didn't fall asleep for at least another hour. The next morning, I decided not to mention it. What was I supposed to say? I heard someone breathing in the living room last night. Lisa would have just laughed, and my mom, practical as always, would have brushed it off. Days passed, and for a while, I convinced myself it was nothing. But then it happened again. This time, the breathing was louder, more pronounced. It didn't sound natural. There was a deliberate slowness to it, like someone standing right next to me, breathing just loud enough for me to notice. I lay frozen, listening for what felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. That morning, I finally brought it up. Lisa laughed, my mom smirked, and I got the reaction I expected. Just my imagination, they said. Maybe I was dreaming. That night, I decided to stay up later, playing video games in my mom's room while she and Lisa were asleep. I wasn't eager to hear that breathing again. Everything was quiet, just the occasional click of my controller, when suddenly, music. Loud, staticky music blaring from the stereo in the living room. I nearly dropped the controller. My first thought was that maybe the alarm had been set accidentally, but when I got to the stereo, I saw it was completely off. No lights, no display, just silence. I glanced at the time, 1:30 a.m., the same time I always heard the breathing. I slept in my mom's room that night. The next evening, I dreaded going to bed, but Lisa and I were back on the air mattress, and I pulled the sheet over my head like a child hiding from the monsters under the bed. Lisa's back was pressed against mine, warm and solid. I shut my eyes, willing myself to sleep. Then it started again, but this time it moved. The breathing was no longer coming from one place. It drifted, circling the room, shifting from one corner to another, growing closer, then retreating, only to come back again. I held my breath, gripping the sheets as my pulse thundered in my ears. Then I felt it. Something brushed my arm. Not a random twitch, not the fabric shifting. Fingers. A slow, deliberate stroke along my forearm, just above the sheet. A touch, so real, so undeniable, that my body locked in place, frozen in absolute terror. And just like that, it stopped. The room fell silent. The air, which had felt thick and suffocating just moments before, suddenly felt normal again. But I didn't dare move, not until the first hints of daylight crept in through the blinds. That morning, I practically tripped over myself trying to tell Lisa and my mom what had happened. As expected, they didn't believe me. I was imagining things, they said, a bad dream. But then I took off my shirt to shower, and there it was. A faint discoloration on my arm, exactly where I had felt the touch. I showed them, expecting some kind of reaction. They squinted, inspected it, admitted it was strange. But belief? No, it never happened again after that night. But to this day, I still wonder, what would have happened if I had moved when it touched me? In September, I embarked on a solo hunting trip in the vast wilderness of Wyoming, seeking to bag an antelope. The landscape was breathtaking, with rolling hills and endless sagebrush stretching as far as the eye could see. I had been preparing for this trip for months, and finally I was here, surrounded by nature's splendor. As I trekked through the terrain, my senses were on high alert, scanning for any sign of my prey. The sun beat down on me, casting a golden glow over the landscape. I had been walking for hours, and my canteen was almost empty, but I pressed on, driven by my determination to succeed. Suddenly, I spotted my quarry in the distance, a beautiful antelope, its coat glistening in the sunlight. I raised my rifle, took aim, and fired. The animal dropped, and I felt a rush of excitement and pride. I had done it. As I walked towards my prize, I noticed something peculiar in the distance. A light, incredibly bright and fast-moving, was hurtling towards me. At first, I thought it was a game warden on a side-by-side coming to check my paperwork. But as the light drew closer, I realized it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The light dove into the sagebrush, disappearing from view. I was perplexed, wondering what it could be. I looked around, but there was nothing in sight. No vehicles, no people, just the endless expanse of wilderness. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was completely alone, with no phone signal to call for help. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, focusing on the task at hand. I tagged the antelope and began field dressing it, my hands moving with practiced ease. But my mind kept wandering back to the mysterious light. What was it? Where had it come from? And where had it gone? As I finished my task, I looked up and my heart skipped a beat. The light was back, traveling away from me at an incredible speed. It was unlike any vehicle I had ever seen, moving with a fluid grace that defied explanation. I watched in awe, my mind racing with questions, but as the light vanished into the distance, I was left with a sense of unease. I felt like I was being watched, and the silence of the wilderness seemed oppressive. I quickly gathered my gear and began the trek back to my truck, my senses on high alert for any sign of danger. As I walked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I could feel eyes upon me, boring into my skin. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The silence was oppressive, and I knew I had to get out of there as fast as I could. I finally reached my truck, my heart racing with fear. I tossed my gear into the back and jumped into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. As I started the engine, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was safe, but as I drove away from the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had left something behind, something that was still out there, watching and waiting. The memory of that mysterious light haunted me, and I knew I would never forget the terror I felt in those lonely hills. From that day on, I avoided hunting alone, always making sure to have a buddy by my side. And when I looked up at the night sky, I couldn't help but wonder if that light was still out there, hurtling through the darkness, searching for its next victim. It's been so long since this happened that a lot of the details are blurry. It's not like it was yesterday. I'll do my best to fill in the gaps with how I remember things playing out. It was the last day of school, 4th grade. Back then, at my elementary school, 4th grade was the last year when kids had to be picked up by a parent. 5th graders were allowed to walk home alone. My mom always picked me up on the last day of school. That day, my best friend Dennis and I had planned a playdate to celebrate summer break. We'd been close since kindergarten, but we weren't in the same class that year. Since we had different dismissal exits, I waited for him outside by my teacher, Miss Blue, as parents shuffled in and out of the parking lot, picking up their kids. Then I heard it. "Tommy, Tommy." I turned and saw a man waving at me, walking briskly toward the curb. He had a friendly, eager expression and introduced himself as Dennis's uncle. He said he was here to pick me up since Dennis's dad had to work late. I glanced over at Miss Blue. I'm being picked up. She smiled. Where is he, sweetie? I pointed at Dennis's supposed uncle, who gave her a polite wave. That was all it took. Miss Blue dismissed me, and I followed him through the crowd. He talked fast, almost too fast. His words jittery and rushed. So yeah, Dennis's dad got held up. Work emergency. You know how it is. Anyway, we're heading back now. Excited for summer, huh? We reached his car, a dark red hatchback. That's when it hit me. Where was Dennis? Shouldn't we be picking him up too? I hesitated as I climbed into the back seat. The man caught my expression in the rearview mirror and smiled. Oh, Dennis is already at my house. He's waiting for you. I nodded slowly but didn't respond. Something wasn't right. I wasn't the kind of kid who openly voiced confusion, especially around adults, but my stomach felt tight. The ride was longer than it should have been, much longer. Our town was small, houses packed closely together. My home was a 5-minute walk from school, yet we had been driving for at least 10 minutes, heading into unfamiliar streets. The man kept talking, asking me what sports I played, what subjects I liked, telling stories about his own elementary school days, but I barely listened. Finally, we pulled into the driveway of a house that looked ordinary enough. Nothing creepy, nothing that screamed danger. Until we stepped inside. The air was heavy. The curtains were drawn so tightly that it felt like nighttime. The only light in the living room came from a single dim lamp in the corner, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Something inside me told me to run. I swallowed hard. Where's Dennis? The man's jittery energy shifted. He suddenly seemed nervous. His smile faltered. Oh, he's downstairs, playing video games. Give me a second, okay? Wait here. He disappeared into another room. I heard a door creak open, then footsteps descending into a basement. My chest tightened. I knew I was in danger. I turned and grabbed the front door handle. It didn't budge. A deadbolt, a lock that needed a key. Panic shot through me, but I tried to stay quiet. My heart pounded as I forced myself to think. There had to be another way out. The kitchen. I darted inside and spotted a landline phone mounted on the wall. My hands shook as I lifted the receiver and quickly dialed 911. The moment the dispatcher answered, I whispered, "Please, I've been kidnapped. Come to this house." They responded immediately, asking for details, but I couldn't say another word. I carefully set the phone down on the counter without hanging up and covered it with a dish towel. Footsteps. The man was coming back up. I sprinted back to the living room just as he called from the basement. "Come on, Tommy. Dennis is down here." Silence. Then he called my name again. His voice changed, suspicious. I stood frozen as he climbed the stairs and locked eyes with me. He stepped closer. His fake friendly expression was gone. Something dark flickered across his face as he grabbed my wrist, hard. I screamed, thrashing against his grip, but he yanked me toward the basement. "Shut up. I'll let you go if you behave." I went limp, crying, as he forced me down the stairs. As soon as I stepped onto the cold concrete floor, the door slammed shut behind me. Click. He locked it. I was trapped. The basement was unfinished, bare cement, an exposed light bulb flickering above, a single wooden support beam in the center. It felt wrong. Upstairs, I heard the man pacing. He wasn't talking anymore, just walking, thinking. Then, after what felt like forever, he opened the basement door again. "You hungry?" I choked back the nausea and whispered, "No." I could not let him go into the kitchen and see the missing phone. The door slammed shut again. Another lock clicked. I sat on the floor, trembling, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then I heard it. The doorbell. It rang 3 times, followed by loud, heavy knocks. I barely breathed. Another round of knocks, then voices. The police. The man didn't move toward the door. He was hesitating. More pounding. More shouts. Then, baying. A loud crash. Multiple footsteps storming inside. I bolted up the stairs, hammering my fists against the locked door, screaming for help. The lock clicked. A police officer grabbed me, pulling me into the blinding daylight outside. 3 squad cars were parked in the driveway, lights flashing. Dennis's dad was there, talking frantically to another officer. And the man, the one who had taken me, was being dragged out of the house in handcuffs. That was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived, my mom collapsed into sobs. There had already been chaos at the school, cops questioning teachers, parents in a panic. Dennis's dad had realized something was wrong almost immediately, and by the time police traced the landline call, they were already searching for me. The man wasn't Dennis's uncle. He was a former work associate of Dennis's dad. He had found out Dennis's dad would be picking us up and used it as an opportunity. I never found out how he knew what I looked like. I never wanted to know. 17 years have passed. That man might be out of prison now. I don't let myself think about it too much. But I know one thing for certain. If I hadn't called 911 before he threw me in that basement, I wouldn't be here right now. Kevin and I had been together for 5 years. Our relationship was strong and built on trust and love. We both loved the mountains and often dreamed of spending a quiet weekend in a secluded cabin. So when Kevin found a charming cabin for rent in the mountains, we were thrilled. It promised a perfect romantic retreat, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The drive up to the cabin was beautiful. The winding roads were surrounded by towering trees, their leaves creating a canopy above us. The air was crisp and clean, a refreshing change from the polluted city air. As we approached the cabin, we were greeted by the sight of a quaint, rustic building nestled among the trees. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. The cabin was perfect, just as we had imagined. It had a cozy living room with a fireplace, a small but functional kitchen, and a comfortable bedroom. However, what caught our attention was the large, old-fashioned attic. The landlord had warned us not to enter the attic, saying it was unsafe and filled with old junk. But Kevin and I were curious by nature. We couldn't resist exploring every corner of our temporary home. After unpacking our bags and settling in, we decided to explore the attic. The entrance was a small, creaky door at the end of a narrow hallway. We pushed it open and were immediately hit by a musty smell. The attic was dark, with only a small window letting in a sliver of light. Dust particles floated in the air, creating an eerie atmosphere. Inside, we found old furniture covered in white sheets. There were wooden chairs with intricate carvings, a rocking chair that creaked with the slightest touch, and a large wardrobe that seemed to loom over us. But the most intriguing item was an antique mirror. It was large, with an ornate gold frame that was tarnished with age. The mirror's surface was cloudy, making it difficult to see our reflections. That night, as we settled into bed, we couldn't shake off the strange feeling the attic had given us. The silence of the mountains was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Just as we were about to drift off to sleep, we heard muffled noises coming from the attic. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Kevin and I exchanged worried glances. We decided to check it out, hoping it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. We grabbed a flashlight and made our way to the attic, but when we opened the door, the room was empty. The furniture was undisturbed, and the mirror stood in its place, reflecting the beam of our flashlight. We returned to bed, trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. But the noises continued, and each time we checked, there was nothing there. The next morning, we woke up feeling exhausted. Our sleep had been plagued by vivid nightmares. In my dreams, I saw reflections in the mirror that didn't match reality. I saw myself, but with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Kevin had similar dreams, and we both felt a growing sense of unease. Determined to get to the bottom of this, we started researching the cabin's history. We discovered that it had once been owned by a family who disappeared mysteriously. The locals whispered about dark secrets and strange occurrences, but no one knew the full story. The more we dug, the more we realized that the mirror might be the key to understanding what was happening. That night, as we sat in the living room, we heard the footsteps again. This time, they were louder, echoing through the cabin. We decided to confront whatever was in the attic. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, we climbed the stairs one last time. As we entered the attic, we saw something we hadn't noticed before. The mirror was glowing faintly. We approached it cautiously. As we stood in front of the mirror, our reflections seemed to shift and change. We saw the family that had once lived here, a mother, a father, and 2 children. They looked sad and frightened. Then their reflections began to move independently of us. They reached out their hands, pressing against the glass, as if trying to escape. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the air around us seemed to thicken. We heard whispers, soft and mournful, filling the room. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and we felt a pull, as if it were drawing us in. We tried to step back, but our feet were rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, and we could see the family's faces contorting in pain. They were trapped, and the mirror was their prison. Desperate to help them, we reached out and touched the glass. Instantly, a shock ran through our bodies, and the room spun around us. When we came to, we were lying on the floor of the attic. The mirror was shattered, its pieces scattered around us. The room was silent, and the oppressive feeling was gone. We stumbled downstairs, our minds reeling from what had happened. We packed our bags and left the cabin, not daring to look back. As we drove away, we couldn't shake off the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. The mirror was gone, but the memories of that night would haunt us forever. We never spoke of it again, but the echoing footsteps and the sad faces in the mirror remained etched in our minds, a reminder of the dark secrets that some places hold. There used to be an abandoned elementary school on the outskirts of Silver Lake, a small town where nothing exciting ever happened. Silver Lake Elementary had been closed for nearly a decade, left to rot with its boarded-up windows and crumbling hallways. By the end of the year, it was scheduled to be demolished. On the last day of school, my friends and I wanted to do something memorable, something reckless. So we all agreed to break into the school and explore before it was gone forever. The storm that afternoon was perfect cover. No one would be outside to spot us, and the heavy rain would muffle any noise we made. Eddie was the only one of us with a car and a license, so he drove us all to the school after lunch. The building sat in an overgrown residential area, not visible from the main roads. Its rear parking lot was surrounded by trees and broken fencing, making it the perfect place to park unnoticed. The school wasn't boarded up, just locked. But Eddie had come prepared. He pulled a baseball bat from his trunk and walked up to one of the classroom windows. "I swear, if someone hears this," I muttered, feeling uneasy. We huddled close, nervous but laughing, as Eddie swung the bat. The glass shattered, and for a second, the only sound was the rain pounding against the pavement. After clearing away the jagged shards, he waved us over. One by one, we climbed through the window and into the abandoned school. The classroom looked frozen in time. Desks, bulletin boards, even old decorations still clung to the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and dust, and every step we took stirred up small clouds of decay. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the eerie silence. "This is so weird," Emily whispered. "It's like everyone just left." With our phone flashlights, we started wandering the empty hallways. The old linoleum floors squeaked beneath our wet sneakers, making it impossible to move silently. Each classroom we entered was untouched, as if the school had been abandoned overnight. Rusting lockers lined the walls, their doors slightly ajar, like open mouths frozen mid-scream. Then we heard it, a distant sound echoing down the hall. We killed our lights and held our breath. Thunder rumbled, shaking the windows. Silence followed. "Probably just the wind," Eddie whispered. We kept moving, pretending we hadn't heard anything. As we neared a hallway intersection, I turned back for one last glance. That's when I saw it. Something was sticking out from a classroom doorway. A shadowy form, barely visible in the dim light. I nudged Eddie. "Look." The others aimed their phone flashlights toward the door. The moment the beams hit it, the thing slid back into the classroom. 4 simultaneous whispers. Oh, Shasterisk. Then we ran. Sprinted down an adjacent hallway, heartbeats hammering in our ears. We didn't stop until we found ourselves in the kindergarten wing, tiny chairs, faded cubbies, and old finger paintings peeling from the walls. That's when we heard it again. A slow, deliberate sound echoing from the hallway we had just fled. We ducked into a classroom and shut the door, hoping whoever, or whatever, it was would keep moving. Lightning flashed. The storm outside had only gotten worse. I pressed my back against the wall, focusing on my own breathing. No one spoke. Then the classroom door handle turned. A slow, quiet click. The door eased open with a creak, but no one was standing there. The hallway was almost completely dark. And then it appeared. A head, slowly peering around the doorway. We all saw it. A face, pale, motionless, watching. Lightning flashed again. I barely got out. We're leaving. We didn't mean to. No response. No movement. Just watching. Eddie, clearly done with the situation, thrust the bat into my hands and fumbled with the window latch. He shoved it open just enough to squeeze through. Go, now, he whispered. He crawled out first, then Emily, then Jake. I was last. I hesitated. The head hadn't moved. It just kept staring. Then, as if realizing I was the only one left, it tilted slightly, almost curious. I felt something tighten in my chest, a deep, primal fear. I clawed through the window, heart racing. I expected to feel a cold grip on my ankle, to be yanked back inside. But nothing happened. I hit the ground running, catching up to the others as we piled into the car. Eddie didn't wait. He threw the car into reverse, tires squealing against wet pavement. We never looked back. The school was demolished later that year, replaced with a park. We never got caught. But to this day, we have no idea who or what was in that school with us. A worker? A squatter? Or something that never left at all? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. From the time I was born until I was 9, my family lived in a small house in Silver Springs, Oregon. The house had been ours for years, but before we moved in, there were whispers in the neighborhood, stories about a little girl who had died there under mysterious circumstances. My older sister once told me that one of our neighbors had warned her about it, but my parents never spoke about it openly. There was no denying that the house was haunted. Strange things happened often, things that still don't make sense to me to this day. In this story, I'll share only a few of the most unsettling experiences. One night, my mother was up late, waiting for my father to get home from his shift at the mill. She was sitting on the couch with the television off, using the dark screen as a mirror to glance down the hallway behind her. That's when she saw something. A little girl standing in the dimly lit corridor. She was too old to be me and too young to be my older sister. My mother's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned her head to look directly at the hallway, but the little girl was gone. She never spoke much about that night, but I could tell it unsettled her. A few months later, my uncle, who was staying with us for a few nights, mentioned something eerie. He had woken up in the middle of the night and seen the same little girl kneeling beside the couch, as if she were praying. She never seemed menacing, only present, almost as if she belonged there more than we did. But not everyone had such harmless encounters. One summer, my father's nephew came to visit from out of state. My mother was never comfortable around him. She always said there was something off about him, something that made her uneasy. The first night he stayed in our house, he woke up screaming. When my father rushed in, his nephew was pale, shaking, drenched in sweat. He swore that a man dressed in black had appeared in his room and tried to strangle him in his sleep. That was the first time my father ever looked truly shaken. He believed in ghosts, but he had always assumed the spirit in our house was the little girl. She had never harmed any of us. This was something different, something darker. The most unexplainable experience I had happened when I was about 8 or 9. I was alone in the backyard, playing on a makeshift swing my father had built. It was nothing fancy, just a thick metal bar wedged between the branches of an old oak tree, with a rope tied to it so my brother and I could swing from it. I was lost in my own world, kicking my legs back and forth, when something made me stop. A strange sensation, like a whisper against my skin. I looked up just in time to see the heavy metal bar coming loose from the tree. It was falling straight toward me, but something was off. It wasn't dropping like it should have. Instead, it was descending slowly, almost gently, like invisible hands were lowering it. I stood there, frozen, until my instincts finally screamed at me to move. I jumped out of the way just as the bar slammed into the ground with a deafening thud. Had I stayed where I was, it would have hit me square on the head. I would have been seriously injured, maybe even killed. When I told my mother, she looked shaken but not surprised. We both came to the same conclusion. The little girl had protected me. But if she was a guardian, then what had attacked my father's nephew? Was it another presence in the house, one that had stayed hidden from us because she kept it at bay? Or was the spirit targeting him specifically because it saw something in him that we couldn't? I never found out the answer. Now I'm 19, and we haven't lived in that house for years. But something strange keeps happening. I keep dreaming about it. In every dream, the house is haunted by the little girl. But unlike when I was a child, I feel terrified of her. The dreams are disturbingly real, as if I never truly left. A few months ago, out of curiosity, I searched online and found that the house was for sale again. No one had stayed in it long after we moved out. I decided to visit. Walking through the house after all those years was eerie. Some things had changed, but many details remained exactly as we had left them. As a child, I had never felt fear in that house, but this time, standing alone in my old bedroom, I felt something I had never felt before, watched. It was an unbearable sensation, like 100 invisible eyes staring at me from all directions. I didn't stay long. After that visit, the dreams have only gotten worse. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Does anyone know why this might be? Most of the things that happened in that house were strange, but not outright terrifying. At least, not at first. Most of the activity took place at night. I'd often hear a loud thud, like something massive, something as heavy as our old dryer, had slammed onto the floor. Each time, I expected to wake up and find it toppled over. But every morning, I'd check, and it was always standing exactly as it had been the night before. Then there was the doll. I slept with it every night, but when I woke up, I'd always find it in the same spot, under my bed, right against the wall. It wasn't possible for it to simply fall there. My bed was flush against the wall, with no real gap for anything to slip through. But the worst part? The doll could record sound. It had a tiny recorder built into its belly. Press it, and it would capture whatever noise was in the room. One evening, my brother and I were fooling around on the old piano in the living room, recording ourselves as we played. We recorded a few different songs, laughing at our mistakes. But when we played back the last recording, there was something extra. A voice. It wasn't loud. It was buried beneath the notes we played, but we both heard it. Something like a breathy moan, a whisper just beyond understanding. We listened again. It sounded like someone saying, "Why?" We were kids. We thought it was hilarious. We played it over and over, making fun of the creepy voice. But now that we're older, now we don't laugh. We don't even know how many spirits were in that house. In my first story, I wrote about 2, a little girl and a man. But there were more, a third spirit, maybe even a fourth. The third was a woman. My father and older brother both saw her. A blonde woman running from my parents' bedroom into the bathroom, wearing nothing but her underwear. The sighting was so clear that one of our neighbors must have seen her too, because soon after, a rumor spread about my mother or my sister running through the house half-dressed. It wasn't true. None of it was true. And then there was the baby. We only heard it once. I was in the kitchen with my mom and brother when we all heard a baby crying from the living room. My sister had just had a baby, so for a split second, we thought she must have come in without us noticing, but no one else was home. That house was full of ghosts, but the little girl was the one we knew was real. Too many people had seen her. My parents once heard her whisper, "Mommy, where's my mommy?" And then there were the dreams. I have never stopped dreaming about that house. The details change, but the core of the dream is always the same. I'm inside the house, trapped in the living room, my bedroom, or my parents' room. There's always a presence there, something unseen. I can feel it. It terrifies me. Sometimes I convince myself that it's the little girl. Other times I know it's something else. But whenever I do see her in my dreams, she always looks the same. Small, just a little shorter than me, and I'm only 5 feet tall. Light brown, curly hair, sunken in dark eyes, and a faded blue dress. And she always comes out of a closet that does not exist in real life. In reality, there's just a solid wall. But in my dreams, the closet is always there. And every time the door creaks open, she's standing inside. Sometimes she steps forward. Other times she just stares. Sometimes the door opens by itself, and she isn't there at all. It has been 10 years since I left that house, but I still wonder, what happened there? When I was a freshman in college, I took an introductory chemistry class. Science had never been my strong suit, and this course was no exception. The classroom was set up with long tables arranged in groups of 4, and I sat at one near the left side of the room, all the way at the end. Sitting next to me was a guy named Zach. He was awkward, painfully so. If I had to describe him, he was about 5'8", a little overweight, and had a scraggly, patchy beard that made him look older than he actually was. He gave off Major Lives on Reddit vibes, always quiet, always observing. But one thing was undeniable. He was a genius at chemistry. It started off as simple classmate interactions. He noticed how much I struggled, so he'd help explain things to me. Eventually, he started offering to do my homework and even let me copy his answers during tests. I didn't get any weird or flirtatious vibes from him, just social awkwardness. So when he asked for my number, I didn't think much of it. He said it was just to send homework answers, and considering how much he was helping me, I figured it was the least I could do. Fast forward to the last day of class. Zach did something I never saw coming. He asked me out. I wasn't remotely attracted to him, and our personalities were polar opposites. But I didn't want to be mean. After all, he had helped me keep an A in the class. So I let him down gently. I lied. I told him I was leaving for Miami for a couple of weeks and wouldn't be around. He didn't even hesitate before responding. "What about when you get back?" That caught me off guard. I figured 2 weeks would be long enough for him to lose interest. But now I was stuck. So I just gave a vague, "Yeah, I might be around, we'll see." He just nodded awkwardly and muttered, "Cool." The rest of that class felt unbearable. I avoided eye contact, packed up quickly when it was over, and went straight to my car. Since I was a commuter student, I wouldn't have to see him around campus anymore. That night, my friends and I went out to a bar in town to celebrate the end of the semester. At some point, I got a text from Zach. "When aren't you leaving for Miami?" I laughed and showed my friends, explaining the situation. We were all tipsy, and they joked that I should just go on one date with him to be nice. I sarcastically agreed, but honestly, I had no intention of ever responding. I figured he'd get the hint. The next morning, I woke up to 2 follow-up texts. One was just question marks. The second read, "You're ignoring me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" I sighed. I felt a little guilty, but mostly, I just wanted him to leave me alone. I replied, "Hey, sorry, I was packing. I'm heading to Miami today." His response came instantly. "Okay." I assumed that was the end of it. That night, my friends and I went out again. Everything was fine, until my phone vibrated and I saw a new text from Zach. "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." My stomach dropped. I felt a cold sweat break out as I showed my friends. They immediately got serious. How the hell did he know I wasn't in Miami? I forced myself to respond. "What do you mean?" His reply was almost immediate. "Nothing. Forget it. I just don't like liars." At that point, I was genuinely afraid. Was he following me? Watching me? I scanned the bar, but I didn't see him anywhere. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somewhere nearby. I didn't respond again. I didn't plan to ever respond again. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that night, after I got home, literally while I was taking my shoes off inside, I heard knocking at my door. 1:00 a.m. I froze. I waited, praying I had imagined it. Then another knock. I swallowed hard and called out, "Who is it?" A voice from the other side. "It's me, Zach." My blood ran cold. I was home alone. I gritted my teeth and shouted, "You need to leave right now, or my dad will come out and beat your ass." Silence. Then footsteps. I waited by the door, listening for what felt like hours. Finally, I texted everyone I knew. My friends, my family. I needed someone to know what was happening. I barely slept that night, but at 3:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. Another message from Zach. It was long, too long, and deeply disturbing. I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now after being used by someone for months. Hurt and anger are two of them. I thought from the start of the semester that our chemistry was through the roof. No pun intended. I must say, I'm hurt that you would make up something as elaborate as a 2-week Miami trip just to avoid going out with me, even after I stuck my neck out for you all semester and risked my own academic standing. I definitely noticed the way you looked at me sometimes in class. I can't pretend there wasn't a hint of interest there. All I'm asking for is one date. That's it. I'm not asking for your hand in marriage, though I surely would be quite the ideal husband, if I do say so myself. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you needed more time to consider the prospect of dating me. I know how much I have to offer, much more than the losers on this campus. If you want, I can come back to your house and we can talk about it in person. I'm only making this offer once. I nearly dropped my phone. At that point, I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I called my dad until he picked up and told him everything. My dad wasted no time. He called and texted Zach repeatedly, leaving him messages that were probably terrifying enough to make Zach rethink his life choices. The next morning, I went to the police station with screenshots of every message. I told them I wanted to press charges. They tried calling Zach to bring him in for questioning. He never picked up, never responded, never showed up at campus again. It was like he had completely disappeared. I'll never know if it was my dad's voicemails or the police trying to contact him, but whatever it was, I never saw or heard from Zach again. I just know one thing for sure. I now understand what it feels like to have a real-life stalker. Later that night, after I got home, literally while I was taking my shoes off inside, I heard knocking at my door. 1:00 a.m. I froze. I waited, praying I had imagined it. Then another knock. I swallowed hard and called out, "Who is it?" A voice from the other side. "It's me, Zach." My blood ran cold. I was home alone. I gritted my teeth and shouted, "You need to leave right now, or my dad will come out and beat your ass." Silence. Then footsteps. I waited by the door, listening for what felt like hours. Finally, I texted everyone I knew. My friends, my family. I needed someone to know what was happening. I barely slept that night, but at 3:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. Another message from Zach. It was long, too long, and deeply disturbing. I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now after being used by someone for months. Hurt and anger are two of them. I thought from the start of the semester that our chemistry was through the roof. No pun intended. I must say, I'm hurt that you would make up something as elaborate as a 2-week Miami trip just to avoid going out with me, even after I stuck my neck out for you all semester and risked my own academic standing. I definitely noticed the way you looked at me sometimes in class. I can't pretend there wasn't a hint of interest there. All I'm asking for is one date. That's it. I'm not asking for your hand in marriage, though I surely would be quite the ideal husband, if I do say so myself. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you needed more time to consider the prospect of dating me. I know how much I have to offer, much more than the losers on this campus. If you want, I can come back to your house and we can talk about it in person. I'm only making this offer once. I nearly dropped my phone. At that point, I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I called my dad until he picked up and told him everything. My dad wasted no time. He called and texted Zach repeatedly, leaving him messages that were probably terrifying enough to make Zach rethink his life choices. The next morning, I went to the police station with screenshots of every message. I told them I wanted to press charges. They tried calling Zach to bring him in for questioning. He never picked up, never responded, never showed up at campus again. It was like he had completely disappeared. I'll never know if it was my dad's voicemails or the police trying to contact him, but whatever it was, I never saw or heard from Zach again. I just know one thing for sure. I now understand what it feels like to have a real-life stalker. Let me take you back to a chilling night in Silver Springs, a small, foggy town in the heart of Louisiana. This story, shared by a former airman, is one of those tales that lingers in your mind long after the lights go out. It was a quiet, humid night in Silver Springs, Louisiana, where the air clung to your skin like a second layer. I was stationed at a military base nearby, a place shrouded in whispers of strange happenings. I won't name the base, but those familiar with the area might recognize it from the details. This story takes place a few years after I arrived. I first set foot on the base in 2006, and like many new recruits, I was greeted with tales of horror. There was the story of a man in a top hat who wandered a narrow dirt road near the storage facility. Another tale spoke of a crazed man hit by a patrol car who vanished into the woods. But the story that stuck with me was about a little girl. It was my second night on shift, and I was paired with an airman who'd been there for years. As we patrolled, he told me about a girl who had died during the construction of the storage area. She'd been playing on the structures while her father worked, but she slipped and fell to her death. The details were hazy, but the story sent a chill down my spine. To make matters worse, my partner took me to the exact spot where it happened. He shut off the engine and turned off the music, leaving us in silence. He startled me a few times, but nothing happened. Fast forward 3 years. I was scheduled to patrol that same area. By then, the storage facility had been mostly closed, except for a few sections we had to check. That night, my partner and I were given a cattle truck for patrol. Our usual vehicle was in the shop. It sounds unimportant, but it plays into the story later. We were supposed to do 3 checks that night. The first 2 went smoothly, but by the third, around 4 a.m., things took a turn. We entered the storage area through 2 large gates, locked them behind us, and began our rounds. My partner was driving, and I was spotting, using a flashlight to check the locks. The road we were on was called Echo Street, the same road where the little girl had died. We were chatting casually when I felt an uneasy shift in the air. The noise of the truck and the radio faded, replaced by an eerie silence. As we approached the structure from the story, I turned to look out the window. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural moan, like the sound from The Grudge. My blood ran cold. I turned to my partner and yelled, "Dude, cut that out." He looked confused. Am I going too fast? I held up a hand, signaling him to stop. The moan came again, louder this time. I turned off the radio and whispered, "Do you hear that?" He stopped the truck, and we both listened. The sound was unmistakable. A woman's groan, like someone struggling to breathe. It echoed around us, coming from both inside and outside the truck. My partner's voice trembled as he asked, "What the hell is that?" We waited, frozen, until the sound came again. This time, it was louder, more desperate. Without a word, my partner slammed the truck into gear and sped off. We nearly flipped the truck on a sharp curve, but neither of us cared. We just wanted to get out of there. When we reached the gates, I jumped out to open them, my partner watching my back. We raced back to the main base and reported the incident to our flight chief. To our surprise, he believed us. "I've had something like that happen to me twice," he said. "Once in that same spot, and another time in the jailhouse." I only went back to that storage area once after that, but I never went down Echo Street again. What do you think we heard that night? Was it the ghost of the little girl or something else entirely? Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. We moved into this beautiful but strangely unsettling house in Silver Creek, Montana, when I was 12. My younger brother, Jake, was 10. We were starting a new life with my dad, his new wife, and our 2 half-sisters. The house was spacious, with tall ceilings and creaky wooden floors, but from the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. Something was off. It was like an invisible presence stood just inches from my face, watching me. I was young, angry, and full of resentment from my parents' divorce. Moving wasn't new for me. I'd bounced from place to place, but I had no idea that this house would be the start of something I could never quite explain. At first, it was just me. I was the only one who saw things, heard things. Nobody believed me. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. We'd leave the house with every light turned off, but when we came back, every single one would be on. My dad brushed it off. "Must be a wiring issue," he'd say. But then there was the radio. I'd get home from school, and the old stereo in the basement, where my brother and I slept, would be blaring at full volume. I'd ask my dad, and he'd casually wave it off. "Oh, that was me. I came home for lunch and must have forgotten to turn it off." Except, how could he forget? That thing was so loud it shook the walls. He would have heard it. Then there was that one night, the night that made me question everything. My aunt came over to help babysit my little sister, Beth. She was 4, full of energy, and loved playing hide and seek. So naturally, we started a game. Beth was good at hiding, but that night, something wasn't right. My aunt and I counted to 50. The house had plenty of places to hide. A master bedroom upstairs, 2 bedrooms in the basement, closets, the laundry room, even the garage. But after searching everywhere, the closets, behind furniture, inside the dryer, under the beds, we couldn't find her. It took 30 minutes. Beth was nowhere. My aunt and I started to panic. We checked the basement again, flipping on every light, looking under everything. I called out for her. "Beth, come out now." Nothing. The house felt different, heavier. I yelled louder. "Beth, this isn't funny." Still, nothing. Then, an hour later, she just appeared. She ran out of one of the basement rooms, giggling like nothing happened. "I was right here the whole time," she said, but that wasn't possible. The room she hid in was empty. No furniture except for a single old bed and a closet. No places to squeeze into, no dark corners. And we had checked that room at least 5 times. That night, I told my grandma about what happened. She paled, looking at me with an expression I had never seen before. "You played that game at night?" she asked. I nodded. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't you know? If you hide at night, you might not be the only one playing. The dead can hide the living. All it takes is one standing in front of you. Some friends and I planned a late summer camping trip last month to celebrate a birthday. We wanted one last escape before the cold set in, so we picked a secluded spot near Black Hollow Pines, a quiet stretch of dense forest outside of Silver Springs, Colorado. The place was rumored to be eerie, but we weren't the superstitious type. Unfortunately, we weren't the only ones with the idea to camp that weekend. The main campground was packed. Tents lined up so close you could probably hear your neighbor snoring. Not exactly the isolated getaway we had in mind. So we drove a little farther down an old dirt road and found Whispering Pines Campground, about a mile or so away. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but that's what we wanted. After circling the area a few times, we picked a site nestled between towering pines. My boyfriend, Jake, and I found a flat spot near an old, gnarled tree and started setting up our tent. Neither of us had been camping in years, so we had to buy all new gear, brand new tent, sleeping bags, and supplies, all still in their packaging. Once the tent was up, I laid out the entrance mat. The wind kicked up, sending the mat tumbling a few feet. I jogged over to grab it and froze. On the bottom was a footprint, a single, perfectly formed, dirty footprint. It wasn't just any footprint. It was barefoot, slender, with an arch that suggested it belonged to a woman. My stomach twisted. I glanced back at Jake and our friend Matt. I was the only woman in the group, and none of us had taken our shoes off. It was too cold for that. Besides, the mat had just come out of the plastic. It hadn't touched the ground long enough to pick up a print. Jake's face darkened. "Nope, not messing with that," he muttered, snatching up the mat and stuffing it into the trunk of his car. We laughed it off, sort of, and got back to setting up camp. The night went on without incident. We built a fire, made s'mores, told dumb stories. Eventually, Jake and I crawled into our tent and drifted off. Sometime deep into the night, around 3:00 a.m., I woke up. Footsteps. Soft, light, quick footsteps circling our tent. At first, I thought it was Matt, but the steps were too small, too delicate to belong to a 6-foot, 190-pound guy. A fox? A raccoon? Maybe, but they just kept circling, over and over. Then it stopped, right next to me. I held my breath. It sounded like someone was rubbing two stones together, then knocking them together in rhythmic beats. My skin prickled. I nudged Jake. "Are you awake?" I whispered. "Yeah," he breathed. "You hear that?" "Yeah." We lay there, unmoving, listening as it circled again, pausing on his side of the tent this time. Then something truly disturbing happened. As I sat up to listen, the sound was coming from Jake's side of the tent, but the instant I laid back down, it was right behind me. I bolted upright. "Did you?" Jake nodded slowly. His face was pale in the dim glow of the moon filtering through the tent fabric. Neither of us moved for an hour. The thing, whatever it was, kept circling, stopping, scratching, tapping. It never unzipped the tent, never tried to get in. It just watched. By the time the sky started turning gray with dawn, the noises stopped, just like that. We told Matt about it the next morning. His response? "Yeah, I heard footsteps too, but it only lasted a few seconds. Figured it was an animal." That afternoon, 4 more friends arrived to join us. Safety in numbers, right? We moved our tent to a different spot, partially because of what happened, but also because the ground was uncomfortable. One of our new friends took our original spot. That night, we were too distracted partying to notice anything unusual. Maybe whatever had been lurking the first night had left us alone. Or maybe it was just waiting. I tried to keep the footprint on the mat intact, but in the chaos of packing up, it got shuffled away with the rest of the camping gear. If I thought for 1 second it was still there, I'd go dig it out and take a picture. But something tells me it's gone. Some people suggested it was just condensation or ground moisture transferring to the mat. But how would that leave such a clear, defined footprint? And why only one? And the noises. Could it have been an animal? Maybe, but animals don't typically circle a tent for an hour, scratching and tapping in patterns. A few people suggested a different theory. A lingering spirit, a woman who once lived or died in these woods. Could it be true? All I know is this: whatever it was, it didn't want us there. And it made damn sure we knew it. Now let me take you to another time and place, a dense jungle in Vietnam, where the line between the living and the dead blurred in the most terrifying way. It was 1968, and I was a young radio operator fresh out of high school, drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War. I didn't know much about war, but I knew I had a duty to my fellow soldiers. One night after a storm, our unit was sent to a heavily wooded area near some Viet Cong huts. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. We were on edge, knowing the enemy could be anywhere. I was assigned to a unit that had just lost their radio operator to a landmine. My first encounter with the enemy was chaotic. Gunfire erupted from the jungle, and we returned fire blindly. When the smoke cleared, we found 3 dead Viet Cong soldiers. It was my first time seeing death up close, and it shook me to my core. A few days later, I was reassigned to an intelligence officer named Frederick Douglass. He was an older man with a cold, calculating demeanor. We flew to a remote location in a Huey helicopter, landing near a cluster of enemy huts. The atmosphere was strange. Soldiers in gas masks moved like ghosts, ignoring me completely. I tried to talk to one, but he just stared at me with empty eyes. Douglas led me to a small hut and told me to wait. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked into a nearby tent. What I saw still haunts me. On a makeshift table were 6 containers, each holding a severed Viet Cong head. Tubes and wires protruded from them, and a green liquid bubbled inside. The heads twitched, their mouths and eyes moving as if they were still alive. Before I could process what I was seeing, Douglas grabbed my shoulder. He was furious. "You shouldn't have come in here," he said, sending me back to the hut. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up in a medical tent with broken ribs and a fractured collarbone. I never saw Douglas or those soldiers again. What were they doing with those heads? Were they experiments or something worse? Some questions have no answers, but they stay with you forever. It was the summer of 2000, a humid July evening in a quiet town in Pennsylvania. My dad's granddaughters, Sarah and Emily, were playing in my bedroom upstairs while the sun dipped below the tree line. Everything seemed normal until their terrified screams echoed through the house. They came barreling down the stairs, tears streaking their faces. "There's a man on a bike in your mirror," Sarah shrieked, her voice trembling. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily clutched my arm. "We saw him. He was just there, inside the mirror." Skeptical but unnerved, I climbed the stairs and walked to my room. The girls hesitated at the doorway, refusing to step inside. A chill ran through me as I turned toward the antique mirror standing against the far wall. And then I saw him. A man on an old-fashioned bicycle, gliding silently across the glass. My breath caught in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run, but instead I blinked and turned away. When I glanced back, the mirror was empty. I exhaled, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light, and started to leave, until something compelled me to turn back once more. And there he was, not the man on the bicycle, but someone far more familiar, my Uncle Joey. He stood near my bed, looking as real as he had in life, except the back half of his body was fading, like mist dissolving into the air. My stomach clenched. He sat down on the edge of my bed, his gaze locking onto mine. "Sam," he said, his voice warm yet urgent, "I need to tell you something. It's important." Panic surged through me. My legs refused to move. I backed into my closet, gripping the doorframe. "No," I whispered, "go away." His face was sad, but his voice remained steady. "You need to listen. Something's going to happen." I shut my eyes. "Just leave." A heavy silence followed. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I love you, Sammy." When I opened my eyes, he was gone. I stood there, shaking, tears streaming down my face. The moment my body unthawed, I bolted downstairs and told my brother what I had seen. He didn't believe me. Neither did my mom when she got home. "You miss him," she said softly. That's all. 3 days later, on the 4th of July, we went to a barbecue at my cousin's house near the outskirts of town. It was the kind of sweltering summer day where the air felt thick and heavy. While waiting for the food, my cousins, my brothers, and I wandered into the nearby woods. The forest was dense, the cicadas buzzing in the trees. After walking for a while, we reached a canal cutting through the landscape like a dark ribbon of water. The second I stepped near it, my stomach lurched. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I shook it off, took a sip from my water bottle, and kept going. But it happened again at the next canal, and then again at the third. Each time I got closer to the water, I felt sicker, lightheaded, like something was pulling at me from beneath the surface. Uneasy, I convinced the others to head back. By the time we returned, I felt normal again. I laughed it off, thinking it was just the heat. Then my dad's phone rang. I watched his expression shift as he listened to the voice on the other end. His knuckles whitened around the phone. He didn't say much before hanging up. Instead, he turned to my mom. "Let's talk inside." Her brow furrowed. "What is it?" "Let's just. Tell me, David." He hesitated. Then, in a quiet, broken voice, he said, "I'm sorry. Your dad passed away." The world seemed to stop. My mom's sobs cut through the silence as she collapsed into my dad's arms. I stood frozen, heart hammering. I swallowed hard and forced out the words. "How?" My dad hesitated before answering. "He had a heart attack and drowned." A sick, hollow feeling bloomed in my chest. Where? He didn't have to say it. I already knew. A canal. A cold shiver ran through me despite the sweltering heat. My brother sat beside me, stunned. "It's not a coincidence," I whispered. "Uncle Joey came to warn me." I didn't listen. Neither of us spoke after that. We just sat in silence, letting the weight of it settle over us. From that day forward, whenever my uncle appeared to me, I listened, no matter how much it scared me, because I had learned something that night. Not everyone gets a warning. And sometimes the dead have something to say. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Finally, let me take you to an abandoned military base where a cryptic message led to a nightmare none of us could have imagined. It was late at night when our unit received a distress call from Bravo Unit, who had gone missing weeks earlier. The message was a string of numbers, 5 to 82 to 47. We arrived at the base, now a ghost town. The fog was thick, and the silence was deafening. Signs of a struggle were everywhere: overturned furniture, bloodied rags, and scattered ammunition. The numbers played on a loop through the radio, growing louder as we approached the command center. Inside, the air was stale, and the only light came from blinking consoles. We searched the base, finding nothing until we reached the laboratory. The door was ajar, and inside, we found the bodies of Bravo Unit. Their faces were twisted in terror, but there were no signs of struggle or bullet wounds. In the corner, we found Commander Haskins, clutching a notepad with the numbers 5 to 82 to 47 scrawled across it. Beneath them, a chilling sentence: "They're coming for us." As we fled the base, a shadow emerged from the fog. We scrambled into our vehicle, the numbers still echoing in our minds. Who was coming for them? What did those numbers mean? Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but they stay with you, haunting your thoughts in the quiet hours of the night. I grew up in a quiet little town where nothing much ever happened, until that night. My best friend Jake lived just a few blocks away, and his dad was one of the town's police officers. That night, Jake and I were hanging out in his basement, waiting for his dad to get home from his late shift. It was around 12:30 a.m. when he walked in, shaking off the cold as he hung up his coat. We told him about the weird knocking sounds we had been hearing from upstairs, loud, deliberate knocks that echoed through the house. Each time we rushed up to check, there was nothing. The doors were locked. The house was empty. His mom was out at a bingo night with friends, and his younger brother was at my house with my brother. There was no one else there. At first, we thought it might be our brothers messing with us, but when we called my house, they were still glued to their video games, unaware of anything unusual. That's when I joked, maybe it's a ghost. Jake rolled his eyes. Come on, man. That stuff isn't real. His dad, though, didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen counter, a strange look on his face. You sure about that? He asked. Let me tell you something. Jake's dad went on to tell us about a night from his own past when he and his brother, Jake's uncle, tried something they had read about. It wasn't a Ouija board, but another way to communicate with spirits. They had set up candles, turned off the lights, and placed a notepad and pen in the middle of the room. After reciting the Lord's Prayer, they wrote a simple question. Is there anyone here who wants to talk to us? Minutes passed. Then his dad's hand felt, pulled. He barely realized what he was doing when his fingers grasped the pen and scrawled a single word onto the paper. Yes. The air in the room changed. They kept writing, asking questions, and receiving answers. His dad wouldn't tell us what was said after that, just that the conversation happened. Jake shook his head. Nah, that's all crap. I wasn't so sure. Then let's try it. So we did. We went down into his basement, turned off the lights, and lit some candles just like his dad had described. The glow flickered against the concrete walls as we sat at the glass table, placing a pad and pen in the center. We both leaned in. Jake wrote, Is there anyone here who would like to talk to us? Silence. The pen sat still. He sighed, shaking his head. See? Nothing. He picked up the pen again and muttered, Man, this is a joke. A big freaking hoax. The second he said it, my hand, not under my control, slammed onto the table. I grabbed the pen, pressing it hard against the paper, dragging it across the surface in wild scribbles. Jake laughed at first, thinking I was messing with him, until he looked at my face. His smile dropped. Dude, he whispered. I wasn't moving. Not really. My head was tilted slightly downward, my expression empty. But my eyes, he told me later, weren't mine. They were locked on him, dark and unblinking. He swallowed hard. Hey, look, if something's here, we don't mean any harm. My hand stopped. I blinked, the room coming back into focus. What just happened? Jake told me, but even then, he still wasn't convinced. He grabbed the pen, scribbling onto the pad. If you're really here, blow out one candle. Every single candle except the one next to the pad went out. The air grew heavy, thick with something neither of us could name. Still, Jake pushed forward. He wrote, Now light them again. Instantly, the flames reappeared. All of them. As if they had never gone out. And still, Jake wasn't convinced. Frustrated, I decided to push it further. I wrote, He doesn't believe. How can you make him believe? The moment my pen left the paper, my hand moved on its own. The pressure was undeniable. My fingers clenched around the pen as it scrawled. Take the pen and tried to lift it off the table. Jake, still skeptical, reached out and gripped it. It wouldn't budge. His knuckles whitened as he strained, but it was like the pen was cemented in place. He shook his head, his voice strained with forced laughter. This is a trick. I don't believe you. The pen twitched. Then, his hand started writing on its own. His face twisted in shock as his fingers gripped the pen tightly, dragging it across the page. The words appeared in jagged letters. Hold the pen in the air. Jake hesitated. Then, shaking, he lifted the pen, holding it in front of him. The moment it was raised, something yanked his arm forward. His entire body lurched. His arm plunged through the glass table as if it weren't even there. Only the sound of the candles flickering remained. Then, footsteps. Jake's dad burst into the room. He must have heard the commotion from upstairs. His eyes darted to the shattered table. then to Jake, sprawled on the floor, trembling. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the pen from Jake's hand and with sharp determination wrote a single word on the pad. Goodbye. Both of you, now. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Jake and I picked up the pen, hands shaking, and wrote it too. Goodbye. The air shifted, like a weight had lifted. We never spoke of that night much after. Sometimes we joke about it. But Jake, the biggest skeptic I ever knew, hasn't questioned the existence of spirits since. I took something else from that night. It's not about whether you believe in spirits, ghosts, or whatever is out there. It's about respect, because you never know what's watching. And worse, you never know what might answer if you call out to the wrong thing. It was my senior year when this happened. Senioritis had fully kicked in, and I was counting down the days until graduation. Football season was everything in our small town of Silver Springs. Friday night games were the highlight of the week. Our team was actually good for once, which was rare in a place where the most exciting thing to do was sit in a diner and watch people pump gas. One Friday, during a painfully boring elective class, my best friend Ethan and I were killing time like usual. Ethan, the smooth talker, spun his chair around to face two girls in our class, Emily and Sarah. You guys coming to the game tonight? He asked with that signature grin of his. They agreed to meet us later, and after school, Ethan dropped me off at home. A few hours later, he picked me up, and we swung by to grab Emily and Sarah. We parked in the school's back lot, right near the woods. We cracked open a couple of Four Locos. Don't judge, it was high school, and poured them into water bottles to sneak into the bleachers. The game started late, and by the third quarter, the sun had set. By the fourth, it was pitch black, and our team was getting destroyed. Most of the crowd had already left, but we stayed, planning to hang out on the field afterward. When the game ended, the stadium felt strangely empty. The players trudged back to the locker room, and the visiting team boarded their buses. Within minutes, the lights flickered off, leaving us in near darkness except for the glow of the moon. We laid down on the field, staring up at the stars, but Ethan had another idea. Let's go into the woods, he said, nodding toward the dark tree line. Emily and Sarah hesitated, which only made Ethan more insistent. When they refused to budge, he and I took off running toward the woods, knowing they'd have no choice but to follow. We crawled under a torn section of the fence and started down a narrow trail. The air was thick, damp. The trees groaned in the breeze. The girls trailed behind us, clearly uneasy. That's when Ethan nudged me. Dude, look, he whispered. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. A figure stood just ahead, half hidden between two trees. A woman. She was tall, too tall. Her silhouette was stretched, unnatural, like a shadow cast against the trees. Her voice cut through the stillness. You kids shouldn't be in here, she said, but something was wrong. She didn't move, yet she seemed to be getting closer, her form shifting, stretching taller. Ethan and I bolted. We ran, screaming for Emily and Sarah. We didn't stop until we reached the car, locking the doors behind us. What the hell was that? I gasped. A 7-foot-tall woman, Sarah asked, her voice trembling. You're joking, right? We weren't. We kept our eyes on the woods, expecting her to emerge, but she never did. Who was she? Why was she out there alone at night? The woods were fenced off, and our school didn't have security back then. Months passed. By summer, I had taken a job as a custodian at the school. It was easy money, mostly mowing grass and cleaning up empty classrooms. One afternoon, I was cutting the grass in the central courtyard when I felt eyes on me. I glanced up at the second-floor windows and froze. A woman stood there, staring down at me. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with short, curly hair. Her face was blurred by the glare of the window, but I could feel her watching me. I waved. She didn't move. I ran inside to find my boss. There's a woman upstairs, I told him, leading him to the math hallway. But when we got there, all the doors were locked. The lights were off. The classroom where I had seen her was completely empty. My boss chuckled. "You need some coffee, kid?" I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. But later that evening, while mopping the second-floor hallway, I heard it. A woman's voice. "Young man." The words echoed from inside an empty classroom. I turned off my radio. The hall was silent. I checked every room. Nothing. I didn't go back to that hallway for the rest of the summer. And I never set foot in those woods again. I've never shared my story beyond my closest friends and family. Not because I didn't want to, but because most people don't believe. Either they assume I'm exaggerating, or they think I'm just trying to tell a good ghost story. But after reading others' experiences, I know I'm not alone. Some of you will understand what I went through. This isn't one isolated event. It spans years. If it seems long, that's because it has to be. Every experience ties together. It all happened at my childhood home in Cold Creek, Montana. A secluded ranch-style house nestled between dense pine forests, with a long driveway that always felt just a little too dark at night. It had that classic eerie charm, creaky wooden floors, a draft that moved through the house even when the windows were shut. The two hot spots of activity were the guest bedroom in the north corner and my basement room directly beneath it. Let's get to the first incident. I was in 8th grade when it happened. Walking up the driveway, flipping through the mail, I heard the front door slam shut. Hard. I looked up just in time to see a dark figure pass by the narrow glass panel next to the door. I wasn't scared, at least, not at first. I just assumed it was my mom. She was usually home before me. But when I reached the door, it was locked. A weird chill ran down my spine. "All right, Mom," I muttered. "Real funny." I unlocked the door and stepped inside, waiting for her to jump out and scare me. But the house was silent. No footsteps, no TV, nothing. I called out, walked through the house, checked her bedroom, her office. No one was home. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find and went room by room, every door, every closet. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I imagined the shadow. Maybe the wind slammed the door. But deep down, I knew. This was just the beginning. A year later, my parents remodeled the basement. They knocked down walls, added a game room, and gave my brother and me our own rooms. My mom was proud of it, always showing it off to her friends. One afternoon, I came home and, out of habit, called out, "I'm home." I stopped, listening for a reply. From below, in the basement, I heard two women talking. I thought nothing of it, just another one of my mom's house tours. I hurried down the stairs toward my room. But the second I stepped inside, the voices stopped. The room was empty. I stood there, heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat. I had just heard them. I knew I had. I turned and left the basement as fast as I could. The uneasiness in my room didn't fade, so I tried something. I started collecting masks. I'd heard somewhere that certain cultures believed masks could keep spirits at bay. Maybe it was nonsense, but I was desperate. I hung 14 of them above my bed. For a while, things were quiet. Then, one day, I walked into my room and froze. Every single mask had been ripped off the wall. Some were flung to the other side of the room. One was completely shattered. No one had been home except my mom, and she swore she hadn't touched them. My brother had been at school with me. I took the hint. That night, I carefully packed most of them away, leaving only 3. And as I did, I whispered, "I'm sorry." By the time I reached high school, I'd come to accept that my house was haunted. I started noticing a pattern. Everything happened between 2:00 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. One night, I fell asleep on the living room couch. Around 2:00 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the house. Then, suddenly, they broke into a full sprint. They were coming straight for me. The sound grew louder. The floorboards creaked under the invisible weight. The glass cabinets shook as something unseen barreled toward me. My dog, who had been asleep at my feet, bolted toward the noise, barking wildly. Just as the steps reached me, there was a high-pitched skid, like sneakers screeching on a gym floor. Then, silence. I held my breath. My heart pounded. The room was empty. The next morning, I told my mom everything. She believed me. She admitted she'd noticed the guest room closet doors were always open in the morning, no matter how many times she closed them. We weren't alone. By college, I only came home on breaks, but the spirits hadn't forgotten me. One winter night, I woke up to a crushing pressure on my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. A dark figure loomed over me, pushing down. For the first time in my life, I was sure I was going to die. Then suddenly, it let go. I gasped for air and stumbled to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, faint red lines circled my throat. Maybe it had been sleep paralysis. Maybe I imagined it, but I wasn't taking any chances. I slept on the couch for the rest of my break. The last major event was during my senior year of college. I had dumped my suitcase in my room, papers scattered across the floor. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps. They were stepping on my papers. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. Each step crinkled the paper, getting nearer. I held my breath. Then suddenly, two voices, the same two women I had heard years ago, murmuring, whispering, in my room. I sat up in bed. Who's there? The voices stopped, and then, without warning, a blood-curdling scream. It erupted from the foot of my bed and rushed toward me. I've never heard anything like it, so loud, so piercing, so inhuman. I fumbled for my lamp and slammed the light on. Nothing was there. My hands were shaking. My body wouldn't stop trembling. I didn't sleep for 2 days. Nothing major has happened since. Now I'm engaged. My fiancée has heard my stories, but she's never seen anything herself. When we stay over for the holidays, we sleep in the guest room. And sometimes, late at night, the closet doors rattle. She heard them once. It freaked her out, but it didn't scare her away. I don't feel them as much as I used to. Maybe they're moving on. Maybe I am. But I know, deep down, they're still there. Have you ever experienced something like this? Would you have stayed in that house? Let me know what you think. After my mom and her boyfriend split, we moved in with my grandparents in Silver Springs, Montana. I had lived there before as a kid, and even back then, I noticed strange things happening in the house. Of course, nobody believed me, so I kept it to myself. It started small, footsteps upstairs when no one was there. I'd be alone watching TV, and I'd hear slow, deliberate pacing in my grandparents' room, just back and forth. At first, I ignored it, but after a while, it got so annoying that I finally called out, "Who's there?" The footsteps stopped instantly. I brushed it off. Maybe the house was settling, or my mind was playing tricks on me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I caught a glimpse of someone darting into my grandpa's office. I assumed it was my grandma, so I called out to her. No response. When I went to check, the room was empty, completely still. At night, it got worse. I'd hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps going up and down the stairs. The thing was, they only stopped when I spoke out loud. But the worst happened when I was younger. I was in one of the spare bedrooms, playing Nintendo, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A woman, dressed in white, standing on the balcony, just staring at me. I bolted out of there so fast, you'd think I was running for my life. My mom told me I was imagining things, so I shrugged it off and went back to my game. But then, she was there again. Same spot, same eerie, unblinking stare. I never slept in that room again. Years later, when I was in college, I came home late one night, around 2 a.m. My dog, Madison, was waiting for me upstairs, so I sat on the floor and played with her for a bit. That's when I heard it. The sliding door in the next room slid open. Then, footsteps. Madison's ears perked up, and she let out a low growl before barking at the wall separating my room from the next. Figuring it was my grandma shutting the balcony door, I went to say hi. But when I opened the door, The room was pitch black. The sliding door, locked. I didn't sleep much that night. Every light stayed on. The radio and TV played at full volume. The next morning, I casually asked my grandma if she had been in the guest room. She frowned. I haven't been in there all day. I live in another city now, but I still work in Silver Springs. Sometimes when I'm too tired to drive home, I crash at my grandparents' place. A few weeks ago, I slept on the couch. I woke up 4 times that night. Each time, I heard the same thing. Footsteps. Even though I was the only one in the house. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was just past midnight when I first heard it, what sounded like my mom in the kitchen, rustling the trash, maybe taking it out. The usual nighttime noises, nothing out of the ordinary. But when I went upstairs to check, she was in bed, fast asleep. The kitchen was empty. By 12:30, an uneasy feeling crept over me, like someone else was in the room with me. My cat, usually calm, suddenly went rigid, its eyes locked on the darkened hallway. Then the noises started again, faint movements, almost like footsteps. But they weren't coming from outside or downstairs. They were coming from upstairs. I hesitated, but eventually, I went back down to my room. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just overthinking. But at almost 1 o'clock, that same feeling hit me again, stronger this time. That's when I heard it, a low, raspy cough. Then I saw the shadow on the stairs. I bolted after it, but no matter how fast I moved, it was faster. By the time I reached the top, it had already disappeared into the kitchen. I heard footsteps, quick, deliberate, moving across the linoleum floor into the family room. I followed, my heart pounding. The room was dark as always. This house is never anything but dark. But the deck light was on, casting a dull glow through the glass doors. And that's when I saw him. Jerry. Or at least, what I think is Jerry. He stood on the deck, motionless, staring at me. But I couldn't make out his face. He was blurry, almost see-through, like an old photograph fading away. I stepped closer, barely breathing. And then, he just evaporated. Since then, nothing's happened. I'm just sitting here, waiting. I know something will happen again once I'm tired. It always does. It's been a long time since anything like this happened. Years, actually. So why now? Why tonight? I don't know what this thing is or why it picks certain times to show itself, but it's never made sense. I don't want to call it a ghost. That sounds ridiculous. But what else do I call something that looks human but isn't? Jerry isn't just a shadow. When I do see him clearly, he looks like a man, but off. Wrong. About my height, maybe a little shorter. Pale gray skin, dead-looking eyes, always wearing a tank top and camo pants, almost bald. And that cough, deep, rattling, like a smoker who's been at it for decades. Lately, I've been hearing sneezing too. I don't get it. He never touches me, never physically hurts me, but he messes with my head, makes me see things that aren't real, or maybe they are real, but only when he's around. Sometimes it's the mirror. My reflection isn't me, it's Jerry. Then, in an instant, I'm myself again, or I'll see him standing in front of the mirror, watching me, before vanishing like a glitch in reality. Sometimes I see blood dripping down the walls, but only in the mirror, or a hand curling around the doorway, just out of sight. And the basement. God, the basement. I swear I've seen bodies hanging from the ceiling. At first, they look like bags, but then the shape sharpens, and I see them for what they really are. But the moment I blink, they disappear. Sometimes I'll see faces where there shouldn't be any. And the walls, the television screen. Static will fill the TV, and a twisted, deformed face will emerge from the flickering gray, staring at me before vanishing. The static lingers for a while before the screen goes back to normal. Lights flicker when the weather is perfectly fine. Things go missing, only to turn up years later in places they shouldn't be. Files vanish from my computer. Sometimes I find my drink partially gone. A light turns on in the middle of the night. Doors open by themselves, but I never actually see them open. I'll walk into a room, and they'll just be open, or my fan will be off when I wake up, but the power never went out. Then there are the phone calls. The caller ID will show numbers that don't make sense, just 666, or a single digit like 9. Sometimes it's a string of numbers that don't belong to any real phone number, like 43.6, 346.54, 74, 65, 745.7. And when I pick up, static, or a voice distorted and low, whispering something unintelligible before the line goes dead. Sometimes I hear rustling upstairs like someone digging through plastic bags. Other times I hear someone walking just behind me on the stairs. But when I turn, there's no one there. I'll chase the shadow, but I never catch it. If I don't figure out how to stop this, I'm going to lose it. This has been happening since I was a kid. It's never tried to hurt me, but that doesn't make it any less disturbing. I've learned to live with it. I have no choice. But that doesn't mean I understand it, and I don't think I ever will. Cold Hollow Road was the place to be on Halloween night. Every year, people gathered there, scaring each other before heading home to drink and laugh about it. That was the only kind of fun left in a town like ours. But any other night, it was just a forgotten road lined with old, rotting houses, except for one, the abandoned Cold Hollow house. My cousin Matt and I had always dared each other to check it out, but we never did, until one night around 1 a.m. when we were out screwing around, feeling invincible. That's when we passed it. It was worse than I remembered. Half burned, blackened wood curling like dead fingers. The basement still stood, though, like it was waiting for someone to come back. Matt slowed the car, killed the engine, and turned to me. "You know the story, right?" I didn't, not really. He kept his voice low. "Old man Horace lived here with his wife and kids. He was a psycho, hated outsiders, believed in curses. Said he could trap people's souls in the house. They found bodies in the basement. The sheriff tried to arrest him, but Horace killed his whole family instead, shot his wife, strangled his son. And his daughter?" Matt hesitated. "He hanged her from that tree, so people driving by would see." The air inside the car turned thick. I swallowed hard. "Let's go," I muttered. Matt put the car in drive, but suddenly, he slammed the brakes. He whipped his head to the rearview mirror, smacked it with his hand, and then just kept driving. We didn't talk about it. We didn't have to, because I saw it too. A face, a twisted, pale face in the backseat. Neither of us dared to look back. We just kept going. Then, up ahead, a little girl stepped onto the road. She wore a light pink dress, her hair hanging in front of her face. I screamed. Matt swerved, tires shrieking against the pavement. We crashed, right into the tree where Horace had hanged his daughter. Everything went insane. The dashboard flickered. The gas gauge shot from empty to full, back and forth. Matt wasn't in his seat anymore. He was floating inside the car, flung around like a rag doll. My seat belt, which had been secure, unbuckled itself, snapping back so hard it smacked me in the face. And just before I blacked out, I saw him. Horace, standing in front of the car. His sunken eyes locked onto mine, and then darkness. When I woke up, Matt was sitting frozen behind the wheel. "How long was I out?" I whispered. "Only a few minutes," he said, voice hollow. We stepped outside. The car had crashed through an electric fence, barbed wire, and into a tree, but it barely had a scratch. Then, as Matt got back in, the back end of the car lifted off the ground. We scrambled to see what we were caught on. Nothing. We drove home in silence. But the road wasn't done with us. A few nights later, we returned with friends, Trent, Clint, and Jennifer. We needed proof that what happened wasn't just in our heads. This time I drove. Just like before, I pulled up to the house, turned off the engine, and waited. But Matt, he didn't get out. We laughed at first, thinking he was scared, until we tried his door. It wouldn't open. The lock wouldn't budge, not even with pliers. Finally, we gave up and drove off. That's when I glanced at the rearview mirror. Horace stood right behind the car. Jennifer saw him too, reflected in her side mirror, motionless, staring. I didn't say a word, didn't want to scare Matt. But then, my seatbelt pulled tight. Not a little, not like a snag. It tightened, hard. So hard my seat was yanked backward. I gasped, struggling, tears burning in my eyes. It felt like hands were crushing my chest. I tore at the belt until it finally snapped loose. We all sat there, panting, shaken. By the time we got back to town, we were done. We dropped everyone off, and as Matt stepped out, Jennifer screamed. On the back windshield, written in the dust, Matt and Cold Hollow Road. No one had touched the glass. Since that night, something's been wrong. Matt lost vision in his left eye. The doctors say it's nerve damage, but they don't know how it happened. And me, every time someone mentions Cold Hollow Road, my nose starts bleeding. Every single time. I don't know what it wants, but I know it wants us to come back and never leave. Now, some people say I imagined it. Others think I was too young to understand what I saw, but I wasn't. A 9-year-old kid doesn't make up something like this. It happened at a hotel in Colorado. My family and I live in Illinois, but we were on a trip, staying at this brand new hotel, so knew it wasn't even a year old. After dinner, my parents and grandparents took me downstairs to the pool. My grandparents and my dad sat on the lounge chairs, watching me swim, while my mom went outside to soak in the hot tub. The pool itself was nothing special, just your average indoor hotel pool. But the walls were strange. They were giant windows, almost like tinted plastic, looking out into the night. By then, it was late, and the glass reflected more of the pool's bright interior than the darkness outside. At some point, my dad left with my grandparents. They went upstairs while he stepped outside to get my mom. That's when I climbed out of the pool, wrapping myself in a towel, and turned toward the windows. My reflection looked back at me, but there was something else. I squinted, stepping closer. A man. I blinked and glanced over my shoulder. I was alone. My skin prickled as I looked back, shifting to another section of the window to make sure I wasn't seeing something from outside. But no, there was no one there. And yet, in the glass, the man remained. He wasn't standing close. His figure looked distant, smaller than a normal person, almost floating in the air. His features were pale, and his form was oddly transparent. A creeping chill spread over my skin. He wore black shoes and dark trousers, a white shirt, one of those old-fashioned blouses from the 1800s. Over it, a black tailcoat, and on his head, a tall, old-fashioned top hat. He looked to be in his 40s. He walked slowly, his head bowed as if deep in thought. I stood frozen, barely breathing. Then, without warning, he lifted his head and looked straight at me. I gasped as the back door swung open. My mom stepped inside, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Michelle, are you okay?" she asked, frowning. I hesitated. My family doesn't believe in ghosts. I don't either, or at least I didn't, but I knew what I had seen. "Was anyone outside just now?" I asked instead. She shook her head. "No, it's empty out there." I swallowed hard, turning back to the window. My reflection stared back at me. The man was gone. I forced myself to shake it off. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe it was a trick of the light. I got back in the pool, determined to forget. But when I glanced back a few minutes later, he was still there. A sickening coldness swept over me, and I dove underwater, not wanting to see anymore. Eventually, my mom and I left. We were just stepping onto the elevator when the fire alarm suddenly blared through the halls. We stopped, startled, as hotel guests spilled out of their rooms. but there was no smoke, no heat, nothing. Minutes later, a manager announced that it was a false alarm. Only, no one had pulled it. No one knew how it happened. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not in a menacing way, but as if something was keeping an eye on me. I still don't believe in ghosts, not really. But here's a thought. The hotel was brand new. What if it was built over something older? What if years ago there had been another hotel on this land, one that burned down? Maybe people died that night. Maybe this man was one of them. And maybe he came back to make sure it never happened again. What do you think? This happened when I was a sophomore. Lunch periods were randomized, so I only had 2 friends, Liam and Mike, in mine. A few months into the school year, a new kid named Craig joined our first period astronomy class. Craig sat next to me, and at first, he seemed normal. But as the day went on, something felt off. His jokes were just a little too dark, his laughter too forced. By lunch, he'd invited himself to sit with Liam and me, and it didn't take long for Liam to give me that look. He noticed it too. After school, Craig texted me, "There's a cop car outside your house." I rushed to the window. Nothing. Then I saw him standing in my driveway grinning. "Got you," he said. That night, my back doorbell rang. Craig. I called the cops. Turns out, Craig had a history. He vanished after that, but I still wonder what he really wanted. It was my first day back at school after being held back a year. The air in Silver Pines High had that stale locker room scent, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to be annoying. I wasn't exactly excited to repeat a grade, but one thing caught my attention. There was a new kid, Chester. Something about him felt wrong. His skin was too pale, his clothes slightly outdated, like he'd stepped out of a time capsule, and the way he stared, like he knew me. At lunch, Chester sat across from me, his tray untouched. "Where do you live?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have Snapchat?" I laughed it off, but unease settled in my stomach. During English class, I caught him watching me, his lips moving as if he were whispering something I couldn't hear. Then he made a subtle gesture, motioning for me to follow him. Before I could react, he stood and slipped out of the classroom. I don't know why I followed, but I did. The hallway was empty, the buzzing of the overhead lights the only sound. Chester walked with purpose toward the basement door. Without hesitation, he pulled it open and disappeared into the darkness. That night, I got a Snapchat notification. The username, "Why didn't you enter the basement?" Another one popped up. "I know where you live." My stomach dropped. Then, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Heart hammering, I bolted into my closet, barely breathing as I heard slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. My door creaked open. A long pause. Then, sirens. The police arrived just in time. The intruder, gone. They found the basement window wide open. The next morning, the principal sat me down. "We checked the records," she said, her expression grim. "There's no student named Chester." To this day, I don't know what was in that basement, and I don't know who or what Chester really was. What do you think happened to Chester? Have you ever experienced something like this? Let me take you on a journey to the quiet, eerie woods of Maine, where the line between reality and the unknown blurs under the pale moonlight. This is a story of solitude, suspense, and a chilling encounter that will leave you questioning what lies beyond the shadows. Every year, without fail, I make the trip up to Maine for hunting season. It's become a tradition, a way to escape the noise of everyday life and reconnect with nature. I've never been able to afford my own cabin, so I rent an Airman, a cozy little place tucked away near a national park. It's secluded, quiet, and perfect for what I need. Last year, in November 2022, I made the trip alone. My uncle, who used to join me, hadn't been in the best health, so it was just me, my gear, and the vast, silent woods. I arrived late on a Friday night, the kind of night where the darkness feels heavy and the silence is almost deafening. The cabin was at the end of a long, private dirt road, and as I pulled up, the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath my tires. The owner had left the key under the mat, just as promised. I grabbed my bags, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The cabin was warm, the heat already cranked up to ward off the bitter Maine cold. It was small but cozy, with a single bedroom, a living area, and a kitchenette. I unpacked my things, set an alarm for dawn, and settled in for the night. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I grabbed my gear and headed into the woods, posting up behind a fallen tree. Hunting is a waiting game, and I was prepared to sit quietly for hours if needed. But just as I was getting comfortable, I heard a voice behind me. "What the hell are you doing here?" I turned, startled, to see a man with gray hair, maybe in his 50s, standing a few yards away. His voice was low and angry, and he was staring at me like I'd just trespassed on sacred ground. "Excuse me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hunting's restricted here," he said, his tone sharp. "You best leave the way you came." I apologized, explaining that I hadn't realized the area was off limits. He didn't seem to care. "I've seen people like you before," he said, "always coming up here for the wrong reasons." I didn't argue. I grabbed my things and started walking back to the cabin, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. By the time I reached the cabin, the man was gone. I decided to drive to a different park, one where hunting was allowed. I spent the morning there but had no luck. Around midday, I returned to the cabin to regroup and grab a quick meal. But when I got back, something felt off. The door was unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it before I left. Inside, things seemed different. My bag was unzipped, and I was almost certain some of my belongings had been moved. I checked every room, but there was no one there. I chalked it up to paranoia, grabbed some takeout from a nearby village, and headed back to the cabin. That evening, after another unsuccessful hunt, I cooked dinner and settled in to watch an old black and white movie. As I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The unlocked door, the moved belongings, it all gnawed at me. Later, as I lay in bed, half asleep, I heard a sound that jolted me awake. The closet door creaked open. I grabbed my CZ-75 from my hunting pack and pointed it at the closet. "Come out now, or I'll shoot," I yelled, my heart pounding. The door pushed open, and the man from earlier stepped out, his expression shifting from anger to a grotesque smile. "You got me," he said, his voice dripping with malice. I kept him at gunpoint while I called 911. The wait for the sheriff's deputies felt like an eternity. The man rambled about how people like me had no respect for the land, but I wasn't listening. When the deputies finally arrived, they arrested him for breaking and entering. The errand host seemed more concerned about whether anything of his had been stolen than about my safety. He insisted I must have left the door unlocked, but I knew better. That was the last time I went hunting alone. Sometimes the woods hold more than just wildlife. They hold secrets, shadows, and the unsettling feeling that you're never truly alone. What do you think was really going on in that cabin? Have you ever felt that eerie presence in the quiet of the night? Every November during hunting season, I take a trip up to northern Montana to rent a cabin for the weekend. Buying a place of my own never made sense for just one trip a year, so I stick to errand rentals. I wouldn't call myself an expert hunter, but I've been working on it. Some years I went with my uncle, but lately his health's been bad, so I've been going alone. Last year, November 2022, I rented a cabin near Flathead National Forest. I got in late Friday night after a brutal drive from work. The place was way off the main road, tucked at the end of a long dirt driveway, surrounded by thick pines. When I pulled up, the only sound was my truck's engine. No wind, no animals, just heavy, suffocating silence. I parked as close as I could, found the key under the mat, just like the owner said, and stepped inside. The cabin was small but cozy, with the heat already turned up. A welcome surprise, considering how cold Montana gets in November. I dropped my bags, set my alarm for dawn, and went to bed. By first light, I was deep in the woods. I found a good spot behind some fallen trees and settled in, rifle ready. Hunting is a waiting game, but this time I didn't have to wait long. "What the hell are you doing here?" The voice came from behind me, sharp and sudden. My gut lurched as I spun around. A man stood a few yards away, maybe in his 50s, gray-haired and scowling. "Excuse me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Hunting's restricted here," he said flatly. I frowned. That didn't sound right. I had checked the maps. Still, I apologized, said I hadn't realized, but he just stared at me. "I watched you walk up here," he said. "You need to leave. Now." Something about the way he said it, calm but firm, unnerved me, the kind of warning that wasn't really about the hunting rules. I nodded, gathered my gear, and left. When I glanced back, the man was gone. I spent the morning at a different spot where hunting was allowed, but luck wasn't on my side. Around noon, I decided to head back to the cabin for a break. When I got there, the door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it before I left. Inside, things were off. My bag was unzipped. A few things, like my flashlight and phone charger, were in different spots than I remembered. Nothing was missing, but the feeling in my gut told me someone had been here. I tried to shake it off and drove to the nearest town for some takeout. A cheap Chinese place, the kind that somehow always hits the spot. By the time I got back, I was exhausted. I ate quickly, then crashed for a nap. Later that evening, I went back out to the woods, hoping for better luck. The sun was low by the time I started heading back. The whole way, I had that crawling feeling on my neck, like I was being watched. Back at the cabin, I locked the door behind me. Twice. I made dinner, watched an old black and white horror movie, and tried to relax, but I couldn't shake the unease. Then, just as I started drifting off to sleep, click. The soft, deliberate sound of a door opening. I sat up fast, heart hammering. My eyes darted around the room. Then I saw it. The closet door, open, just an inch. I grabbed my CZ-75 from my hunting pack, aiming straight at the dark gap. "Come out, or I'll shoot." My voice was unsteady, but my grip wasn't. The door creaked wider, and he stepped out. The same man from the woods. But this time, he wasn't angry. He was smiling, a grotesque, open-mouthed grin that showed a missing front tooth. "You got me," he murmured, voice sickly amused. I kept the gun trained on him as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The operator stayed on the line while I waited, gun raised, my pulse pounding. It felt like an eternity before I saw the flashing red and blue lights outside. The sheriff's deputies arrested him on the spot, breaking and entering. He didn't resist, didn't even look surprised, just kept smiling as they cuffed him. The air host was more pissed about the police being called than about me almost getting murdered in his damn cabin. He insisted I must have left the door unlocked, but I know I didn't. I've never gone back, and I don't think I ever will. I was 14 when I went on my first deer hunt with my family, my dad, my cousin, and me. We were deep in the woods of northern Wisconsin, right in the heart of winter. The days were short, and the cold settled in fast once the sun dipped below the horizon. I was alone in my blind, about 2 miles south of my dad's stand, when the chill started to sink into my bones. My fingers felt numb, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I decided to pack up and make my way toward him before nightfall. As I walked, I heard it, the soft crunch of leaves behind me. I turned, expecting to see a deer moving through the underbrush. Nothing. Then I noticed the path, a wide, unnatural trail through the leaves, too big for a deer. My pulse quickened. I walked faster, but the sound returned, heavier this time. Then came the noise, a guttural, bone-chilling screech like a dying animal. I ran, boots thudding against the frozen ground. I flicked on my headlamp. That's when I saw it. A towering, emaciated figure, at least 10 feet tall, stood between the trees, its elongated limbs stretching in the moonlight. I didn't think. I just ran. By the time I reached the cabin, I collapsed on the steps, dry heaving from exhaustion. My dad found me there, shaking, barely able to speak. When I told him what I saw, he didn't believe me. Not at first. I've never hunted alone since. It was a Friday evening, and I was 13 years old. My dad, my grandpa, and I were heading to our favorite hunting ranch in Alice, Texas. We'd been going there for years, and I loved everything about it. The quiet, the thrill of the hunt, the memories. We arrived at the ranch around 10 p.m. and set up camp. The ranch was 300 acres, with a small shack for sleeping and a field for dove hunting. We were sitting around the campfire, telling stories when we heard it. A blood-curdling scream that sounded like a human hybrid. Everyone froze. The ranch owner, an older man in his 70s, told us to check it out. We took his ATV and searched the perimeter, but we didn't find anything. The next morning, I was in my blind before dawn, waiting for the sun to rise. I saw something moving in the trail and grabbed my night vision scope, expecting to see a deer. Instead, I saw a person, or something that looked like a person. It was distorted, but it had the outline of a human. It turned toward me, and I heard the same scream from the night before. I fired every round I had, but when I looked again, it was gone. We still go to that ranch, but it's never been the same. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In the fall of 1986, I was 23 years old and working as a lineman in West Kentucky. I'd always loved the woods. They were my escape, my safe place. One evening, I went hunting in a remote area called Ridge. I parked my truck and walked about 3/4 of a mile to my stand. As I was climbing down after dark, I heard something moving in the thicket. I turned on my flashlight and started walking back to my truck. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the trail, blocking my way out. As I got closer, I realized it was two people, a guy and a girl, maybe in their 20s. They didn't move or say a word as I walked past them. When I got back to my truck, I noticed all 4 tires were flat, each one filled with roofing nails. I never found out who those two people were or why they were there, but I've never gone back to that area alone. Winning the state championship was the best thing that ever happened to me. I played basketball for my college team, and this year we were unstoppable. We had the skills, the chemistry, and the drive. That final game was intense, but when the buzzer rang and we were crowned state champions, it felt like we had climbed a mountain. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins, but little did I know what would happen later that night would make everything else fade into the background. After the game, our team captain, Ethan, insisted on throwing a party to celebrate. He had this old farmhouse about 45 minutes outside of town. His family owned it, but no one lived there anymore. It was one of those places that gave off a vibe, isolated, surrounded by woods, and too far away for anyone to bother us. We arrived around 9:00 p.m., and before I knew it, the beer was flowing like water. I'm not much of a drinker, but tonight was an exception. We were champions after all. I drank a lot. Everyone was cheering, laughing, and blasting music so loud that the windows rattled. The world was spinning, but I didn't care. The feeling of winning made everything else seem insignificant. Eventually, the party started to die down. People left in small groups, but I stayed later than most, still buzzing from the alcohol and the excitement. When I decided to leave, it was past 2:30 a.m., and I could barely walk straight, but I wasn't going to crash on Ethan's couch. I wanted to get home, get into my bed, and sleep off the craziness of the night. The drive back was long and eerie. I took Route 41, a highway that cuts through miles of forest. It's the kind of road where your headlights are the only source of light for miles. The trees on both sides loomed like giants, stretching toward each other, blocking out the moon. Every time I passed an empty field or an old, crumbling house, my mind played tricks on me, imagining shapes in the shadows. But I just kept driving. It must have been around 3:00 a.m. when it happened. I was a few miles from the next town, tired and still a little drunk, but I forced myself to stay alert. That's when I saw it. A kid, a little boy, standing right in the middle of the highway. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. He couldn't have been older than 10, just standing there, wearing old, tattered clothes like something out of the 1950s. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes, there was something off about them. They were too wide, too dark. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, staring right at me. I swerved, trying to avoid him. The car spun out, tires screeching, and before I knew it, I slammed into a tree. The impact jolted me forward, my head banging against the steering wheel. For a moment, everything was a blur of pain and confusion. The airbag didn't deploy. Of course, this was an old car, my dad's actually, and I cursed under my breath, tasting blood. But then I remembered the kid. I shot up in my seat, eyes scanning the road. Nothing. No kid, just the empty stretch of highway and my busted car against a tree. I stumbled out, the night air cool against my face. My head was pounding, but all I could think about was that boy. Where had he gone? He was right there in front of my car. I looked up and down the road, squinting into the shadows between the trees. There wasn't a sound. No footsteps, no movement, just the distant hum of insects and the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. I walked around the car, my legs shaky. There were no other cars, no sign of anyone else on the road. I even checked under the car, half expecting to see him lying there, but there was nothing. It was like he had never existed, but I knew what I saw. He was there. I didn't imagine it. I leaned against the car, staring into the forest. I thought about walking into the woods, calling out for the kid, but something deep inside me told me not to. Something about those trees, that dark road, it felt wrong. Eventually, I got back in the car. The engine started, but it was making a terrible grinding noise. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. I drove slowly the rest of the way, my eyes glued to the road, terrified that the boy might appear again. I made it home, but that night stuck with me. No one believes me, of course. They say it was the alcohol, or maybe I fell asleep at the wheel, but I know what I saw. I was just over 16 then, and my family usually ordered Papa John's pizza for delivery. But this time, my mom decided to pick it up to give me some driving practice. We went earlier than planned, hoping to provide me with extra time behind the wheel. It turned out well, as the pizza was finished earlier than expected, so everything seemed to be going smoothly. We grabbed the pizza and headed home, ready for dinner. As we were setting up, about 5 minutes after getting back, a loud engine noise started rumbling outside. It grew louder and louder with each passing second. Then, in the blink of an eye, we saw a bright red blur zip past our window so fast we could barely register it. Almost immediately, there was a loud crash, followed by the terrible sound of scraping metal. We rushed to the window and saw a bright red sports car that had slammed into a minivan down the street. Both vehicles were completely wrecked, crumpled from the impact. My mom immediately ran outside to check if anyone was hurt and to call for help, while my brother and I were told to stay inside and continue eating. We did, not leaving the house until the adults needed help keeping the little kids occupied while they handled the chaotic scene outside. It turned out that 2 separate gatherings were happening on our street that day. One was a family reunion at our next-door neighbor's house, and the other was at the top of the street, hosted by the guy who owned the red sports car. But things at his party had gone downhill fast. An unknown man had shown up at the party, serving drugs and alcohol to the guests, especially the car's owner. While everyone was distracted, this guy started stealing things from the house, sneaking off with whatever he could find. After grabbing a load of valuables, he made his boldest move yet. He stole the host's red sports car. The thief sped off down the street, but he didn't get far before catching the attention of the police. They had noticed him blowing past speed limits, so they decided to chase him. Panicking, the thief drove even faster to try and escape the police, pushing the car to its limits. But in his rush, he lost control, which led to him crashing head-on into the minivan parked down the street. Thankfully, despite the destruction, the owner of the minivan, our neighbor's daughter, was incredibly lucky. She had been just about to leave with everything packed in the back of the van and ready to go. The only thing left was to get her baby, who was inside with her. Normally, the baby was quiet, but this time, the baby suddenly started screaming. Because of this, the daughter stayed inside to comfort her baby instead of heading out to the van right away. That delay saved their lives. Had the baby not cried, both mother and child would have been in the van at the moment the sports car collided with it. It was chilling to think about how close it had come. As I stood there thinking about it, I realized something else. My family had left to pick up the pizza earlier than we normally would have, and on top of that, the pizza was ready ahead of schedule. Both of those things rarely happened based on the usual time it took for the pizza to be ready. Considering my inexperience with driving, we should have been on that street right around the time that red sports car sped by. I knew I wouldn't have been skilled enough to avoid a car going that fast, and the thought of what could have happened sent a chill through me. The man who stole the car and caused the crash survived but was arrested on the spot after the accident. He was later charged with theft, reckless driving, and endangering lives. The family's insurance helped them replace the destroyed van, and although the emotional shock lingered, everyone was just relieved that no one had been seriously injured or killed in the wreck. It was the fall of 1996, a night etched into my memory like a scar. It was one of those rainy nights where the sky seemed angry, and the world felt heavier. The storm had been raging for hours, and the roads were slick and treacherous. I was driving my old beat-up sedan along Route 47. My friend Ben was in the passenger seat, nervously tapping his foot. He hated driving in the rain, but we didn't have much of a choice. We were coming back from a small family gathering hours away from home, and the weather had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The rain beat down on the windshield, and even with the wipers working overtime, I could barely see the road ahead. The headlights illuminated only a few feet in front of the car, casting eerie shadows on the wet asphalt. I kept my grip tight on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, trying to focus on keeping us on the road. Ben kept glancing out the window, but there wasn't much to see, just endless sheets of rain pouring from the sky. Out of nowhere, we heard a loud screech. It took me a second to realize that it wasn't coming from us. It was another car. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of headlights speeding toward us. They were coming too fast. Before I could react, the car behind us swerved, trying to avoid us, but ended up clipping the back of our car. The impact sent us spinning out of control. I could feel the tires lose their grip on the road, and in a matter of seconds, we were sliding sideways. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. The car skidded toward the guardrail, and all I could do was hold on, bracing for the inevitable crash. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering filled the air as we slammed into the guardrail, the front of the car crumpling like a tin can. My head whipped forward, and the seatbelt dug painfully into my chest. When we finally came to a stop, there was an eerie silence. The only sound was the rain pounding on the roof of the car and the faint hissing of steam rising from the wrecked engine. My heart was racing, and my body was shaking. I turned to Ben, but he wasn't moving. Panic surged through me as I tried to unbuckle my seatbelt, my hands trembling. I called his name, hoping he was just dazed, but there was no response. I managed to unbuckle myself and turn toward him again. His head was slumped to the side, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. I reached over and shook him gently, my voice shaky as I called his name again. This time, he stirred, groaning in pain. Relief washed over me for a moment, but it quickly faded when I looked down at his legs. The front of the car had been crushed inward, and his right leg was pinned beneath the twisted metal. My stomach churned at the sight. I didn't know what to do. The rain was still coming down hard, and the visibility was almost zero. No one else was on the road, and there was no way I could move the wreckage by myself. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal, not surprising for this part of the highway. I tried to comfort Ben as best as I could, but he was in and out of consciousness, his face pale and sweaty. Time seemed to stretch on forever. I was scared, helpless, and completely alone in the middle of a storm with my friend barely hanging on. It felt like an eternity before I saw flashing lights through the rain. A car pulled up behind us, and 2 paramedics rushed over. They worked quickly. but I could see the grim expressions on their faces when they realized the extent of Ben's injury. His leg was too far gone, crushed beyond repair. I stood there in shock, watching as they cut him free and loaded him onto a stretcher. The realization that he was about to lose his leg hit me like a punch to the gut, but there was nothing I could do. The hospital later confirmed what I already knew. Ben's leg had to be amputated. The crash had shattered it completely, leaving no other option. I still think about that night sometimes. The rain, the darkness, and the sound of the crash replaying in my head. It was a night that changed everything in the blink of an eye, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. I used to work for a small security company. It was a quiet job, mostly just sitting in empty buildings, making sure everything was safe. My name is Ethan, and I've been doing this job for a few years now. But there's one night I'll never forget. It was a chilly October evening when I got assigned to watch over an old, abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Silver Springs, a small town in the Midwest. The place gave me the creeps from the moment I arrived. The windows were broken, and the wind howled through the empty halls. But I needed the paycheck, so I sucked it up and got to work. As the sun set and darkness settled over the building, I felt a sense of unease wash over me. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself it was just an old building, nothing to be afraid of. But deep down, I knew there was something off about that place. I did my rounds, checking every corner of the hospital, making sure no one had snuck in. Everything seemed normal until I reached the basement. The air down there was thick and musty, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I descended the stairs. The basement was dark, barely illuminated by the dim glow of my flashlight. I shone it around, trying to make out my surroundings, when I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a low guttural growl, coming from somewhere in the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, closer this time. I knew I had to get out of there, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I started to back away slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I let out a scream and turned to run, but something grabbed hold of my ankle, sending me crashing to the ground. I scrambled to get away, kicking and thrashing against whatever had me trapped, but it was no use. Whatever it was too strong, dragging me further into the darkness. I fought against it with everything I had, but it was like trying to wrestle with a shadow. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt it release its grip, and I scrambled to my feet, sprinting up the stairs and out of the basement. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for air and covered in sweat. I looked back at the hospital, half expecting to see whatever had attacked me chasing after me, but there was nothing, just the dark silhouette of the building against the night sky. I stumbled back to my car, shaking from head to toe. I didn't know what I had encountered down there, but I knew one thing for sure. I never wanted to go back. I quit my job the next day, telling my boss I needed a break from security work. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I was terrified of what lurked in the shadows of that old hospital. To this day, I still have nightmares about that night, and every time I close my eyes, I can still hear that low guttural growl echoing in the darkness, a reminder of the horrors that lurk just out of sight. A couple of years ago, I was home alone, enjoying a rare night of peace. My parents had gone out for a dinner date, and my siblings were away at college. I was looking forward to a night of binge, watching my favorite TV show and indulging in some guilty pleasure snacks. As I settled into the couch, I noticed that the house was eerily quiet. The creaks and groans of the old wooden floorboards seemed louder than usual, and the wind outside seemed to be whispering strange melodies. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the night wore on, the strange noises grew louder and more frequent. I heard footsteps outside my room and the sound of someone rummaging through the kitchen. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling, but deep down, I knew something was off. I decided to investigate, my heart racing with anticipation. I slowly got up from the couch and made my way to the kitchen, my senses on high alert. As I entered the kitchen, I was met with an unsettling sight. The lights were on, and the room was spotless, but there was a feeling of unease in the air. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice grew louder, more urgent, and I could make out the words, "Get out while you still can." I knew then that I had to act fast. I quickly grabbed my phone and dashed to the front door, but as I reached for the handle, I realized it was locked. I was trapped. The whispering grew louder and more menacing, and I knew I had to think fast. I ran back to the living room and grabbed a nearby vase, ready to defend myself if necessary. As I stood there, frozen with fear, I heard the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. They were heavy and deliberate, and they seemed to be getting closer. I raised the vase, ready to strike, but as the figure entered the room, I realized it was not what I expected. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, with long silver hair and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. She was dressed in a long white gown, and she moved with a slow, deliberate pace. As she approached me, I could feel a chill run down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond, but instead, she reached out a bony hand and touched my face. I felt a surge of electricity run through my body, and suddenly, I was flooded with visions of the past. I saw a family, happy and laughing, but also a tragedy, a loss that seemed to consume them all. I saw the woman standing in the same spot, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. As the visions faded, I realized that the woman was a ghost, trapped in our home for decades, and I knew that I had to help her find peace. With a newfound sense of courage, I reached out and took her hand. Together, we walked through the house, uncovering secrets and memories that had been hidden for years. As we reached the front door, I knew it was time to let her go. I opened the door, and she vanished into the night, her eyes finally at peace. As I stood there, feeling a sense of relief wash over me, I knew that I would never forget this night. I had faced my fears and helped a lost soul find peace, and I knew that I would always be grateful for that. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. I had just finished college and was looking forward to a relaxing break. My parents' house is in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by tall trees that cast long shadows at night. It's a cozy place, but it can feel a bit creepy when you're alone at night. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room, scrolling through my phone. I was wide awake despite the late hour. Suddenly, my phone rang, and I saw my sister's name on the screen. That was already a bit weird since her room was just down the hallway from mine, and she could have just come in and talked to me. But I picked up the phone anyway, and as soon as I said hello, the call ended. I thought maybe she had hung up by mistake, so I got out of bed and walked down the hallway to her room. As soon as I reached her door, I heard her screaming. It was a loud, terrified scream, and it sent chills down my spine. I quickly opened the door and rushed inside. She was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear and her face pale. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to the corner of the room, her hand shaking. I looked over, but there was no one there. She started crying and told me that she had woken up and seen a dark shadow just centimeters from her face. She said it was tall and menacing, and had made her feel like she was being suffocated. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was just a dream, but she insisted that it was real. She said she had called me for help, but when I reminded her that her phone was downstairs in her purse, she looked confused. That's when things started to get weird. I checked my phone, and there was a log of the call from her number, but when we checked her phone, there was no record of the call. It was as if the call had never happened. We were both confused and a bit spooked, so we decided to go downstairs and make some tea. As we sat in the kitchen, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. The house was quiet, but I kept hearing creaks and groans, like someone was moving around upstairs. I tried to tell myself it was just the old house settling, but deep down, I knew it was something more. We stayed up for a few more hours, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the more we talked, the more confused we became. It was as if we were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Eventually, we went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the dark shadow my sister had seen and the mysterious call that had disappeared from her phone. I started to feel like we were being watched, like something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment to strike. The next day, we told our parents what had happened, but they just shrugged it off, saying it was probably just a prank caller or a bad dream. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew what my sister had experienced. It was real, and it was terrifying. After that night, I started to notice strange things around the house. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would hear footsteps in the hallway at night. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but deep down, I knew it was something more. I started to feel like I was living in a horror movie, and I didn't know how to escape. I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare, and I didn't know how to wake up. One night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and started searching the house from top to bottom. I looked in every room, every closet, and every corner, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. But as I was about to give up, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. "Get out while you still can," it said. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, and it sent chills down my spine. I knew then that I had to get out of the house, and fast. I ran back to my room, grabbed my bag, and started packing. My sister saw me and asked what I was doing, and I told her we had to get out of there. She looked scared, but she didn't argue. We quickly packed our bags and left the house, not looking back. We never went back to that house again, and we never spoke about what happened that summer. But I know that I'll never forget the terror I felt and the feeling of being watched by something I couldn't see. I used to work at City Hall a few years ago as a security guard. It was a quiet job with little to no excitement, but that all changed one fateful night. As part of my duties, I had to patrol the entire building, including the abandoned jail cells in the basement. They hadn't been used in years, but it was still my responsibility to check them regularly for any squatters or trespassers. It was probably my second time patrolling alone when things started to get weird. I made my way down to the old prison holding cells, my flashlight in hand. The hallway was long and narrow, about 6 meters wide and 100 meters long, with cells on both sides. The only light came from bulbs hanging from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As I walked past the fourth column of cells, the lights suddenly went out. I was plunged into darkness, and my heart started racing. I turned on my flashlight and walked back towards the light switch, my beam dancing across the walls. Right when I was about to flip the switch, the lights flickered back on. I thought to myself, this is strange. I'm getting out of here. But I knew I had to finish my patrol. I started walking faster, quickly checking each cell as I passed. But when I was about halfway down the hallway, the lights went out again. This time, I heard 2 cells slam shut, the sound echoing through the hallway. I didn't hesitate. I ran as fast as I could, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls as I sprinted toward the other end of the hallway. I reached the stairs and took them 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my chest. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs and slammed it shut behind me, leaning against it to catch my breath. I was in the main lobby of City Hall, and it was bustling with people, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get as far away from those cells as possible. I made my way to my workstation, my hands shaking as I tried to calm down. I called my supervisor and asked if any electrical issues had been reported. He said no, and I knew I had to tell him what happened. But when I tried to explain, the words caught in my throat. I was stuck at my workstation for the next 2 hours, my mind racing with thoughts of what could have caused the strange occurrences. I was paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting something to jump out at me. And when my shift finally ended, I got out of there as fast as I could. I never went back to those cells again. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down there waiting for me, and I knew I'd never forget the terror I felt that night, running from the darkness and the slamming cells. From that day on, I made sure to avoid the basement at all costs. I took the long way around, even if it meant being late for my rounds. And when I finally left City Hall for good, I knew I'd never miss that place. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the sound of those cells slamming shut. And I know that whatever was down there, it's still waiting for me. I used to work the night shift at a rehab facility where the streets were rough and the patients were rougher. But it was a job that needed doing, and I was proud to be a part of it. The facility was an old building with creaky floors and flickering lights. It was like something out of a horror movie. But I tried to ignore it. My job was to keep an eye on the patients and make sure they didn't get into any trouble. But trouble always seemed to find us. The patients would get restless and start causing a ruckus, and I'd have to calm them down. It was a tough job, but I was good at it. One night, I was sitting at the desk, watching the monitors, when I saw him. A guy standing outside the gate, staring up at the camera. He was a big guy with a scruffy beard and a menacing look in his eye. I didn't like the look of him, but I tried to ignore him. He was probably just some local punk trying to cause trouble. But he didn't leave. He just kept staring up at the camera, like he was trying to see something. I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was too still, too quiet. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. I decided to use the intercom to see if he was okay. "Hey, buddy, you need some help," I said, trying to sound friendly. But he didn't respond. He just kept staring up at the camera, like he was in a trance. I was starting to get creeped out. I called my coworker, Mike, over to take a look. "What do you think, Mike? This guy's been standing there for 20 minutes, just staring up at the camera." Mike looked at the monitor, and his expression turned serious. "I don't like it," he said. "Let's go check it out." We walked out to the gate, and the guy was still there, staring up at the camera. We approached him, and he didn't even flinch. It was like he was in a coma or something. "Hey, buddy, you need some help," Mike said, trying to shake him out of it. But the guy didn't respond. He just kept staring up at the camera, like he was trying to see something that wasn't there. We tried to move him, but he wouldn't budge. It was like he was rooted to the spot. We decided to leave him alone, hoping he'd snap out of it eventually. But he didn't. He just kept staring up at the camera for hours. It was like he was waiting for something or someone, and I had a feeling that when it arrived, we were all in trouble. Finally, after 2 hours, he vanished, just disappeared into thin air. We searched the area, but there was no sign of him. It was like he never existed. But I knew he did, and I knew he'd be back. I could feel it. The rest of the night was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was like the guy had left a shadow behind, a presence that lingered in the air. And then, just as I was leaving my shift, I saw him again, standing outside the gate, staring up at the camera. I knew then that I was in trouble. I knew that he was coming for me. I ran inside, locked the door behind me, and called the police. But when they arrived, he was gone again. I never saw him again, but I knew he was still out there, watching me, waiting for me. And I knew that next time he wouldn't just stare. He'd come for me, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. I quit my job that day. I couldn't take the feeling of being watched anymore. But I know that I'll never forget that guy standing outside the gate, staring up at the camera. He was a reminder that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are real, and they're coming for us. I was in the office late at night, working on an important project. The clock on my computer screen showed 2:04 a.m. Everyone else had gone home, leaving me alone in the big office building. The lights hummed and flickered above me, casting strange shadows on the walls. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept drifting to the rumors about the building. Some said it was haunted, built on top of an old Indian burial ground. I didn't believe it, but the darkness and silence of the night made me wonder. As I typed on my keyboard, I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but the feeling stayed, and I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. I looked around the office, but there was nobody there. The cubicles were empty, and all the chairs were pushed in. I was alone. Trying to focus on my work again, I couldn't shake off the rumors. I thought about scary movies where someone is always the last one in the office. I remembered the creepy sounds and strange things that happened at night. And then I heard it, a faint creaking sound, like the floor was shifting. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the sound grew louder. It sounded like footsteps echoing through the empty office. I felt a sense of unease creeping over me. I wanted to leave, but I had to finish my work, so I stayed, trying to ignore the fear building inside me. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, leaving me in darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to move, but my legs felt heavy and unsteady. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to see or hear anything except the sound of my breathing. And then I saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of my cubicle. It was tall and menacing, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I could only watch as the figure moved closer, its eyes fixed on me. I closed my eyes, hoping it was just a trick of the darkness, but when I opened them again, the figure was still there, looming over me like a specter from the beyond. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as it reached out towards me, but just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air. The lights flickered back on, and the office was quiet once again. I sat there, trembling with fear, wondering if what I had seen was real or just a figment of my imagination. I knew then that the rumors were true. The building was haunted, and I had just encountered the malevolent spirit that dwelled within its walls. With trembling hands, I packed up my things and left the office, vowing never to return. As I walked out into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I glanced back at the darkened windows of the office building, half expecting to see the shadowy figure staring back at me, but there was nothing there, just the empty silence of the night. I never told anyone about what happened that night, fearing they would think I was crazy. But deep down, I knew the truth. The office was haunted, and I had to come face to face with its terrifying inhabitant. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder if it would ever come back to haunt me again. In 2013, my dad and I hunted in George Washington National Forest near Deerfield. It was a cold, rainy trip, and we struggled to keep our primers dry. The woods were understandably barren, and after about 3 days, we concluded that we were the only humans on the entire east side of Little North Mountain. We hadn't seen a single truck, let alone another hunter. That night, I was jolted awake by a howling scream, like nothing I'd heard before, going down the mountain from just above camp. It sounded almost human, but not quite. I had my eyes wide open and glued to the ceiling of my tent as my mind raced through all the animals it couldn't possibly be. When a second call answered the first, this one closer to the tent, probably less than 300 yards down the washed-out trail that wound its way up the mountain just behind our camp. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to my dad, who was stretched out on his cot just across the tent. "Yep," was his one-word answer. "The rifles are in the truck," I whispered back. That was the last time those rifles ever spent the night in the cab of the Tacoma, even during a damp black powder season. The following morning, we were up well before sunrise, joking about Bigfoot and scarfing down breakfast oatmeal before heading out to hunt. 2 forest rangers, not game wardens, forest rangers in uniform, pulled up and parked right next to our campsite. Without uttering a word, they slung rifles over their shoulders and headed up the washed-out trail in the direction of the yells we heard the night before. No idea what they were after, but we figured maybe they needed to tell 2 raucous young Sasquatch to keep it down because there were humans in the area. After that, we decided to hunt lower down the mountain. We trudged through the underbrush, our boots squelching in the mud. The forest was thick with mist, and now and then, a branch would snap, making us jump. My dad kept glancing over his shoulder, and I could tell he was just as spooked as I was. But we pressed on, determined to bag ourselves a deer before the end of the season. As the day wore on, the mist grew thicker, and the woods seemed to close in around us. It felt like we were being watched, like there were eyes in the shadows following our every move. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. We stopped for lunch at a small clearing, the silence of the forest pressing in on us. My dad built a small fire, and we heated some canned soup, eating in silence as the mist curled around us like ghostly fingers. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind us, and we both whipped around, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. My dad nodded, his hand strained to the hunting knife at his belt. We sat there, frozen in place, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the steady drip of water from the trees above. "Maybe it was just a deer," my dad said finally, but I could tell he didn't believe it any more than I did. We finished our lunch in silence, the unease hanging heavy in the air. As we packed up our gear and headed back into the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something lurking just beyond the edge of the trees. We hadn't been walking long when we heard it again, that eerie howling scream echoing through the forest. My dad stopped dead in his tracks, his hand tightening around the barrel of his rifle. "What is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My dad didn't answer, his eyes scanning the trees as if searching for some unseen threat. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Whatever was out there, it wasn't anything we'd ever encountered before. We kept moving, the howling growing louder with each step we took. It felt like we were walking straight into the jaws of some unseen predator, the tension thick in the air. I wanted to turn back, to run as far away from whatever was out there as I could, but I knew we had to keep going, had to find out what was making that terrible sound. Suddenly, we burst into a clearing, and there, standing in the center of it, was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its fur matted and unkempt, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It let out another bone-chilling howl, and my dad raised his rifle, his hands shaking. But before he could aim, the creature vanished into the trees, leaving us standing there alone in the clearing, our hearts pounding in our chests. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. My dad shook his head, his face pale in the dim light of the forest. "I don't know," he said finally, "but whatever it is, I don't think it's from around here." We stood there for a moment longer, listening to the sounds of the forest around us, the howling growing fainter with each passing moment. And then, without a word, we turned and headed back to camp. The memory of that terrible creature burned into our minds forever. We never did find out what it was that stalked us through the woods that day, but one thing was for certain. We would never forget the terror of that encounter, the feeling of being hunted by something beyond our wildest nightmares. As we packed up our gear and headed back to civilization, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lurked in the depths of the George Washington National Forest, waiting to be discovered by unsuspecting hunters like us. I was hunting last summer in the woods near my hometown in Oregon. The woods were my sanctuary. Every weekend, I'd trek out with my rifle, seeking the peace only nature could offer. But one summer day, everything changed. I set out early in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The forest was alive with chirping birds and rustling leaves. It would be a perfect day for hunting, or so I thought. As I trudged deeper into the woods, I noticed something odd. The usual sounds of nature had gone silent. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just an eerie stillness that sent shivers down my spine. Ignoring the feeling of unease, I pressed on, but the further I went, the thicker the fog became. Soon, I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. Panic started to creep in, but I shook it off. I was an experienced hunter, after all. I could handle a little fog. Then, out of the mist, I saw it. A cabin. It loomed before me, ancient and decrepit, like something out of a horror movie. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached cautiously. I knocked on the door, hoping for some sign of life, but there was no answer. With a shaky hand, I pushed the door open and peered inside. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with dust. It looked like no one had been there in years. But then, my eyes fell on something that made my blood run cold, a hunting rifle, identical to mine, leaning against the wall. Fear gnawed at my insides as I backed away from the cabin. What was going on? Who did that rifle belong to? And where were they now? I stumbled through the fog, my mind racing with questions, but no matter which way I turned, I couldn't seem to find my way out of the woods. It was like the forest itself was playing tricks on me, leading me in circles. Hours passed, and still I wandered through the fog, exhaustion weighing heavy on my limbs, and despair threatening to consume me. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a figure ahead, a man standing in the clearing. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards him. "Please," I begged, "help me. I'm lost." But as I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The man's face was twisted in a grotesque grin, his eyes empty and soulless. Before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands clawing at my throat. I fought back with all the strength I had, but he was relentless. It was like fighting a demon straight from hell. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I heard a voice calling my name. Through the haze of pain and fear, I saw a figure emerge from the fog, a woman with a rifle slung over her shoulder. With a swift motion, she raised the rifle and fired, the shot ringing out like a thunderclap. The man's grip loosened, and he stumbled back, a look of shock on his face. Then, with a final scream, he vanished into the mist, leaving behind nothing but a trail of blood. The woman helped me to my feet, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded, still reeling from the encounter. "Thank you," I whispered. "You saved my life." She smiled gently, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "You're not the first hunter to stumble into these woods," she said, "and unless we do something about it, you won't be the last." Together, we made our way out of the woods, the fog gradually thinning until we were bathed in the warm light of the setting sun. But even as we left the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and sinister still lurked within its depths. And as long as that cabin stood, no one would ever be safe in those woods again. In 2006, I spent a quiet night alone at my family's farmhouse in Silver Springs, a small, isolated town in the Midwest. My parents were away for the weekend, and I thought it would be a good chance to relax and get some peace. The farmhouse was surrounded by endless fields and a dense forest. It was an old, creaky house, but it was home. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun setting and casting long shadows over the fields. I parked my car and took a deep breath of the fresh country air. I carried my bags inside and locked the door behind me, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. I made a simple dinner and ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the dark landscape. The sky turned a deep purple, and soon it was pitch black outside. I turned on a few lights and settled in the living room with a book. As I read, I started to hear strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling. The wind was blowing outside, making the trees rustle and the shutters creak. But then I heard a distinct sound, like footsteps crunching on gravel. I froze, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal or my imagination. I forced myself to continue reading, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The footsteps seemed to circle the house, stopping and starting again. I put down my book and listened closely. There it was again, the sound of someone walking outside. I stood up and went to the window, peeking through the curtains. I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I told myself it was nothing and decided to check the back door, just to be safe. As I walked into the hallway, I noticed something strange. There were muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the back door to the living room. My heart skipped a beat. Someone had been inside the house. I quickly checked the door and saw that it was locked. How did they get in? I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to stay calm and think. I remembered that we had security cameras around the house. I hurried to the study where the security monitor was. My hands were shaking as I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing various angles of the farmhouse. I scanned the footage, my eyes darting from one camera to another. Everything looked normal at first, just the empty fields and the dark forest. But then, on one of the cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a masked figure standing by the edge of the forest, watching the house. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. The figure was still, like a statue, just staring. I switched to another camera. The same figure was closer now, moving towards the house. I felt a surge of panic. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. The farmhouse was too isolated. I was on my own. I had to find a way to protect myself. I couldn't just sit and wait for the intruder to break in. I needed a plan. I locked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. I found a heavy metal flashlight and held it tightly, feeling a bit more confident. I went back to the living room and turned off the lights, hoping to make it harder for the intruder to see inside. I crouched behind the sofa, peeking out occasionally to see if I could spot the masked figure. The house was silent except for the sound of my breathing. Minutes felt like hours. I kept checking the security monitor, watching the figure move closer and closer. Finally, the figure reached the back door. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't be able to get in. To my horror, the handle turned, and the door creaked open. I had been sure I locked it. How did they manage to unlock it? The figure stepped inside, moving silently through the house. I could see them on the monitor, making their way to the living room. I had to act fast. I remembered there was a back exit in the basement. If I could reach it, I might be able to escape and run to the neighbors for help. I moved quietly, keeping low to the ground. I reached the basement door and slowly opened it, praying it wouldn't make a sound. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The basement was dark and cold. I fumbled for the light switch but decided against it. The darkness was my ally now. I made my way to the back exit, feeling my way along the walls. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. The intruder was following me. I quickened my pace, trying to stay silent. I reached the exit and slowly turned the handle. It was locked from the outside. My heart sank. I was trapped. I could hear the footsteps getting closer. I needed to find a hiding spot. I saw an old wardrobe in the corner and quickly climbed inside, closing the door behind me. I tried to control my breathing, listening for any sound. The basement door creaked open, and the footsteps entered the room. I could hear the intruder moving around, searching for me. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't find me. Minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity. The footsteps came closer, stopping right in front of the wardrobe. I could see the shadow of the figure through the crack in the door. Just when I thought I was doomed, I heard a loud bang from upstairs. The figure froze, then quickly turned and ran back up the stairs. I waited, listening as the footsteps faded away. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. When I was sure the intruder was gone, I carefully climbed out of the wardrobe and made my way back upstairs. The house was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found my phone and saw that the signal was back. I quickly called the police and told them everything. They arrived shortly after and searched the house and surrounding area, but the intruder was long gone. The police told me I was lucky to be unharmed. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, and I agreed. I grabbed my things and left the farmhouse, not looking back. That night changed everything. I never felt safe at the farmhouse again. The thought of the masked figure watching me still haunts my dreams. I learned to always be aware of my surroundings and to trust my instincts. It was a lesson I would never forget. After months of hard work, I finally took a holiday. My job as a graphic designer kept me busy, and I rarely took time off. I decided to spend my holiday in a small, picturesque village far from the city. I rented an Airbnb to enjoy the quiet and beauty of the countryside. The village was charming, with cobblestone streets, old cottages, and friendly locals. The errand was a cozy little house at the edge of the village, surrounded by trees and a small garden. It looked perfect for a peaceful retreat. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that the keys to the house were missing. I searched my bag, thinking I had misplaced them, but they were nowhere to be found. I called the host, a man named Mr. Green, who assured me there was a spare key hidden under the doormat. I found the key and let myself in. The house was quaint, with wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and old-fashioned furniture. It felt warm and welcoming. I unpacked my things and settled in, looking forward to a relaxing week away from work. As night fell, I prepared for bed. The village was so quiet, it felt like the world had stopped. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a faint noise. It sounded like someone was trying to unlock the front door. My heart raced as I listened carefully. The noise continued for a few minutes, then stopped. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I checked the lock and made sure it was secure. Then I returned to bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The rest of the night was quiet, but I slept fitfully. The next morning, I went outside to get some fresh air and noticed the spare key was gone. Panic surged through me as I searched the area around the doormat. The key had vanished. I called Mr. Green again, but he didn't answer. I decided to explore the village and try to forget about the strange incident. The day passed peacefully. I visited the local bakery, walked along the river, and chatted with some villagers. Everyone was friendly and welcoming. By the time I returned to the eremim, I felt more at ease. That evening, as I was reading a book by the fireplace, I noticed something odd. There was a small, crumpled note on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. I picked it up and read the message. "I am watching you." My hands trembled, and I looked around the room, feeling a chill run down my spine. I searched the house but found nothing unusual. I tried to brush it off as a prank, but unease gnawed at me. I locked all the doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever it was outside. The night was long and filled with strange noises. I heard faint whispers, footsteps, and the occasional sound of someone trying to open the door. Each time I checked and found nothing. My nerves were frayed by morning. When I woke up, I found another note, this time on the kitchen counter. "You can't hide." I felt a growing sense of dread as I made my way through the house. I noticed strange symbols drawn in red ink on the walls and furniture. They looked like some kind of ritual markings, and I felt sick to my stomach. I tried calling Mr. Green again, but still no answer. I considered leaving, but my car wouldn't start, and I had no signal on my phone. I felt trapped and isolated. My anxiety grew as the day went on. That night, the sounds returned, louder and more frequent. I could hear someone moving around the house, whispering and laughing softly. I hid in my room, clutching a kitchen knife, and tried to stay awake. I felt like I was losing my mind. In the early hours of the morning, I heard a noise from the attic. I had forgotten the house even had an attic. With shaking hands, I climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the creaky door. The attic was dark and filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner, I saw a small flickering light. I moved closer and found a laptop with the screen on. It was showing a live feed from hidden cameras placed all around the house. I saw myself on the screen, sitting in the attic, and a figure standing behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the host, Mr. Green, had been watching me the entire time. The cameras showed footage of him sneaking into the house, placing the notes, and drawing the symbols. I quickly grabbed the laptop and ran out of the attic. I locked myself in my room and called the police. This time, I managed to get a signal. I explained everything to the operator, my voice shaking with fear. The police arrived within the hour. They searched the house and found more hidden cameras and disturbing footage of Mr. Green planning something sinister. They arrested him, and I was taken to a safe place. I never went back to that village. The memories of that holiday still haunt me. The experience left a scar on my mind, reminding me that sometimes the most picturesque places hide the darkest secrets. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go camping in Pine Lake Forest, a remote area known for its towering trees and eerie silence. Our group consisted of me, Jake, Lisa, and Tom. We had been friends since high school, and this trip was our way of reconnecting after months of busy work schedules. We packed our gear and drove out to the forest on a Friday afternoon. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. As we got deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in a soft green glow. We finally reached our campsite, a small clearing near a quiet stream. We set up our tents and built a campfire. The air was filled with the smell of pine and fresh earth. That first night, we sat around the campfire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows among the trees. We laughed and reminisced about old times. Everything felt perfect, almost magical. After a while, we decided to go to bed, tired from the long day and looking forward to exploring the forest the next day. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the campsite. I noticed that Jake's tent was empty. At first, I thought he might have gone for a walk or to the stream for some water. But as time passed and he didn't return, we started to get worried. Where could Jake be? Lisa asked, her voice tinged with concern. Tom suggested we split up and search for him. We agreed and set off in different directions, calling out his name. I headed towards the stream, where we often spent time in the past. The forest was quiet, except for the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves. As I approached the stream, I saw something strange. Jake's backpack was lying on the ground, but there was no sign of him. I called out for him again, but there was no answer. I picked up the backpack and returned to the campsite. Lisa and Tom were already there, looking worried. "Did you find anything?" Tom asked. I showed them the backpack. "I found this by the stream, but there's no sign of Jake." We decided to search the forest more thoroughly. We marked our campsite with bright ribbons and ventured deeper into the woods. As we walked, we noticed something odd. The forest felt different, almost alive. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the air grew thick and heavy. We came across another clearing, smaller than our campsite. In the center was a circle of stones, and within the circle, the ground was bare, as if nothing had ever grown there. It felt eerie, but we didn't have time to ponder it. We continued our search, calling out for Jake. By the time the sun began to set, we still hadn't found him. We returned to our campsite, exhausted and scared. That night, strange things began to happen. Personal belongings started disappearing. Lisa's flashlight, Tom's jacket, and even some of our food were missing. We heard eerie sounds, whispers in the wind and footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere. As the night wore on, we saw glimpses of Jake in the distance. He looked different, almost ghostly. He would appear for a moment and then vanish into the darkness. We tried to follow him, but he always slipped away. The next morning, we were even more determined to find out what was happening. We remembered hearing an old legend about this forest, stories about people vanishing without a trace. According to the legend, the forest was haunted by spirits who lured people away and trapped them forever. We decided to find out more. We searched for any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. We found old carvings on the trees, symbols we didn't understand. We also found a hidden path that seemed to lead deeper into the forest, a path that felt ancient and forbidden. As we followed the path, the forest grew darker and colder. We felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but we pressed on. The path led us to a large, ancient tree. Its roots were gnarled and twisted, and its branches stretched out like skeletal arms. In front of the tree was a small wooden cabin, half hidden by the underbrush. We approached the cabin cautiously. The door creaked open, and inside we found signs of recent activity, empty food cans, a makeshift bed, and more of those strange symbols carved into the walls. Suddenly, we heard a noise behind us. We turned to see Jake standing there, but he wasn't the same. His eyes were vacant, and he moved stiffly, like a puppet on strings. "Jake, is that you?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he started to walk towards us, his movements jerky and unnatural. We backed away, fear gripping our hearts. It was then that we realized the forest had taken him, and he was no longer our friend. We ran back to the campsite, our minds racing. We had to get out of the forest before it took us too. We grabbed our belongings and started packing up, but as we were about to leave, we heard the whispers again, closer this time. We didn't look back. We ran through the forest, following the ribbons we had tied to the trees. The forest seemed to fight against us, branches snagging our clothes and roots tripping our steps. But we didn't stop. We could feel the presence of the forest closing in on us. Finally, we broke through the tree line and reached our car. We jumped in, and Tom started the engine. As we drove away, we saw Jake standing at the edge of the forest, watching us with those vacant eyes. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back in the safety of the city. We never spoke of that trip again. The forest had taken something from us, something we could never get back. We had gone there to reconnect and enjoy nature, but we left forever changed, haunted by the memory of what we had lost. Working late at the office was something I had gotten used to. My boss, Mr. Hargrove, always appreciated my dedication. We had a good relationship. He trusted me with important tasks and often said I was like the backbone of the company. My colleagues were nice too, but they had their own lives to go back to after work. I, on the other hand, found comfort in the quiet, empty office. That night, I was the last one in the building again. The office was on the 10th floor of a tall building downtown. The view of the city lights from the large windows was beautiful but lonely. I sat at my desk, typing away, the only sound being the hum of the air conditioner and the clicking of my keyboard. The dim lights cast long shadows, making the office look almost eerie. I had a lot of work to finish, reports to complete and emails to send. The stack of files on my desk seemed never-ending. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt a strange unease. The office, usually a place of routine and predictability, felt different that night. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Suddenly, I heard a noise. It was faint, like a soft thud, but in the stillness of the night, it was unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, expecting to see something or someone, but there was nothing. I told myself it was probably just the building settling or the wind. I went back to my work, but the unease lingered. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My pulse quickened. Who could it be at this hour? Everyone had left hours ago. I got up from my desk and walked towards the door. The hallway was dark, the lights on motion sensors only turning on when they detected movement. I peeked into the hallway and saw nothing. The lights remained off, confirming there was no one there. I sighed, relieved but still wary. I turned back to my desk, but then I saw it, a shadow moving across the far end of the office. My blood ran cold. Someone was there. I quickly ducked behind my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the footsteps again, slow and methodical, moving closer. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. They assured me help was on the way, but it would take a few minutes for the police to arrive. Minutes felt like hours when you're hiding from an intruder. I stayed crouched behind my desk, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see the shadow moving along the walls, coming nearer. I had to stay hidden, had to stay quiet. The office, usually a place of safety, felt like a trap. The shadow stopped right in front of my desk. I could see a pair of shoes, worn and dirty, just inches away from me. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I prayed the intruder wouldn't find me. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The intruder had knocked over a chair, cursing under his breath. He seemed frustrated and angry. He started moving around the office, opening drawers, looking for something. I stayed hidden, clutching my phone, waiting for the police. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of sirens. The intruder heard it too. He started panicking, his movements becoming frantic. He ran towards the door, but it was too late. The police were already in the building. I stayed hidden, until I heard the officers' voices commanding the intruder to freeze. I slowly stood up, my legs shaky, and saw the police handcuffing the man. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild. They led him away, and I finally felt a sense of relief wash over me. One of the officers came over to me, asking if I was okay. I nodded, still in shock, and explained what had happened. They told me the intruder had been a wanted criminal on the run for weeks. He had broken into the building, looking for a place to hide. The office was a mess, but I was safe. The police assured me they would stay until everything was secure. I thanked them, feeling a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. The quiet, empty office that I once found comfort in had become a place of terror. As I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to danger. The office, with its large windows and beautiful view, no longer felt like a haven. I knew I wouldn't be staying late anymore, not after what had happened. The relationship I had with my work had changed that night. The dedication and routine that once defined my evenings were replaced with a need for safety and caution. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, grateful to be alive and determined to never let my guard down again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I had just moved into my new apartment a few weeks ago. It was a high-rise building in the city, modern and sleek, with a great view of the skyline. My name is Mark, and I had been living alone since I graduated from college. This was my first time having a place of my own, and I was excited to enjoy the independence. After a long day at work, I returned to my apartment, feeling exhausted. I planned to relax, maybe watch a movie and unwind. The apartment was on the 15th floor, and the view of the city lights at night was always calming. I put my things away, changed into comfortable clothes, and settled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. As I started the movie, I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was part of the movie, but it persisted even during the quiet scenes. I paused the movie and listened carefully. The knocking was coming from the front door. I felt a bit uneasy, but told myself it was probably just a neighbor or someone at the wrong door. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been a prank or maybe someone had already left. I went back to the couch and resumed the movie. A few minutes later, the knocking started again. This time, it was louder and more persistent. I felt a chill of fear. I walked back to the door and checked the peephole again. Still, no one was there. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a prank, or was someone trying to scare me? I decided to ignore it and went back to the couch, but the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to move around the apartment. First, it was at the front door, then it sounded like it was coming from the walls, and then from the ceiling. It was as if someone was inside the apartment, moving around and knocking on different surfaces. I felt my heart pound in my chest. I knew I had to find out what was causing the noise. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and decided to check the apartment thoroughly. I started with the bedroom, shining the flashlight into every corner and closet. Nothing. I moved to the bathroom, checking behind the shower curtain and under the sink. Still nothing. As I stood in the hallway, I remembered something the landlord had mentioned during the tour. There was an old storage room in the basement that connected to the apartment through a forgotten maintenance tunnel. He had said it was locked and rarely used, but the memory of it sent a shiver of unease through me. I decided to check the basement. If there was a way for someone to get into the apartment, it had to be through that tunnel. I grabbed my keys and headed to the elevator. The ride down to the basement felt like it took forever. The air grew colder and more oppressive as the elevator descended. When the doors opened, I stepped into the dimly lit basement. The storage room was at the far end of the basement, down a long, narrow hallway. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with old pipes and cobwebs, and the air smelled musty. I finally reached the storage room door. It was an old, heavy wooden door with a rusty lock. I tried the handle, and to my surprise it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, cluttered space filled with old furniture and boxes. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping the room. In the far corner, I saw the entrance to the maintenance tunnel. It was a narrow, dark passage that seemed to go on forever. I knew I had to make sure it was secure. I walked towards the tunnel, each step echoing in the silent room. As I reached the entrance, I noticed that the tunnel door was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open and shone the flashlight inside. The tunnel was empty, but I could feel a cold draft coming from within. I stepped inside the tunnel, my flashlight barely illuminating the walls. The further I went, the colder it became. I could hear my breathing, loud and ragged, in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the tunnel. There was another door, similar to the one in the basement. I pushed it open and found myself in a small room filled with old maintenance equipment. I looked around, trying to find any signs of an intruder. Suddenly, I heard the knocking again, this time directly behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam trembling. There was no one there. I backed out of the room and closed the door, locking it securely. I made my way back through the tunnel, my nerves on edge. When I finally emerged in the basement, I locked the storage room door and hurried back to the elevator. Back at my apartment, the knocking had stopped. The silence was almost more unnerving than the noise had been. I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I sat on the couch, trying to calm my racing heart. The city lights outside seemed distant and cold. I knew I wouldn't be able to relax or sleep after what had happened. The thought of someone being able to access my apartment through the tunnel was terrifying. I stayed up all night, alert to every sound. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, I finally felt a sense of relief. The day brought a semblance of safety, but I knew I had to talk to the landlord about securing the storage room and the maintenance tunnel. The experience left me shaken, but it also taught me to be more cautious. Living alone had its perks, but it also meant I had to be responsible for my safety. The city was full of mysteries and dangers, and I had just encountered one of them. I hoped I would never have to face something like that again. I've always been close to my family, especially my brother Sam. We grew up together, played together, and even ended up working together. Sam is also a truck driver like me. We share stories about our long hauls, the things we see over the road, and the strange people we meet. But there's one story I've never told him. It happened one night on a lonely stretch of highway, and it still haunts me. Sam and I have a routine where we call each other every evening, no matter where we are. It's our way of staying connected, even when we're miles apart. That night, I had just hung up the phone after talking to Sam. He was parked at a rest stop, safe and sound. I was still driving, the road stretching endlessly before me. The night was dark, with only my headlights cutting through the thick blackness. The highway was empty, a long ribbon of asphalt with no signs of life. The hum of the engine was my only companion. The air inside the cab was cool, thanks to the AC, but I could feel the cold creeping in from outside. The radio played softly, a country song about lost love and broken dreams. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was just past midnight. As I drove, I noticed a shadow on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were standing still, just outside the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, thinking they might need help. It's not uncommon to see hitchhikers or stranded drivers on these lonely highways. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down my window. "Do you need help?" I called out, but there was no response. The figure remained motionless, shrouded in darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were just scared or in shock. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The night air was cold and still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I pointed the flashlight towards the figure, and that's when I saw him clearly for the first time. He was a man dressed in tattered clothes, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring right at me. "Are you okay?" I asked again, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving. I felt a sense of unease grow inside me. Something wasn't right. I decided to get back in my truck and call for help. As I turned to go back, I heard a rustling sound behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. The man was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area with the flashlight. There was no sign of him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I quickly got back into the truck and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call Sam. "Hey, what's up?" Sam answered, his voice cheerful. Sam, I just saw something weird," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There was a man on the side of the road, but now he's gone." "Maybe he just walked off," Sam suggested. "You know how people are. They get scared and run away." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, but I didn't believe it. There was something off about that man. I decided to keep driving and find the nearest rest stop. I needed to get off the road and clear my head. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound made me jump. The highway, once familiar and routine, now felt menacing and strange. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see the man again. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the lights of a rest stop up ahead. I pulled in and parked the truck, grateful for the bright lights and the presence of other people. I decided to stay there for the night. I climbed into the sleeper cab, locked the doors, and pulled the curtains shut. I lay there in the dark, trying to calm my racing heart. I listened to the sounds of the rest stop, the distant hum of engines, the occasional footsteps, the murmur of voices. It was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My heart jumped into my throat. I stayed still, listening. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I reached for my flashlight and shone it towards the window. There was nothing there. I lay back down, flashlight clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next morning, I called Sam again and told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, "Maybe it was just your imagination. Long hours on the road can do that to you." "Maybe," I said, but I knew what I saw was real. I could still see the man's vacant eyes staring at me, still hearing the rustling sound as he disappeared. I never saw him again, but that night changed me. The highway, once a place of freedom and adventure, now felt haunted and dangerous. Sam and I still share our stories, but I keep that one to myself. It's a reminder that no matter how familiar the road seems, there's always something lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. I have worked at the gas station for 3 years now. It's a small place, with just one other person on the shift with me. We have a good relationship. Mike, my coworker, is like an older brother. He watches out for me, and we share stories to pass the time. Our station is out on a quiet road, surrounded by dark woods. Most nights are calm, with just a few customers coming in for gas or snacks. One night, Mike called in sick, so I had to work alone. It was a dark, chilly night, with the wind howling through the trees. The station was quiet, the only sound coming from the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. I felt uneasy being alone. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, and the shadows cast by the trees danced like eerie figures. I tried to keep busy by stocking the shelves and cleaning the counter. The clock seemed to tick slower than usual. Around midnight, a car pulled up to the pump. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel made me jump. I looked out the window and saw an old, beat-up sedan. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there, staring at the station. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The cold air bit at my skin. "Need some help," I called out, trying. Last summer, my stepdad and I decided to head to a dirt biking spot called Walker Valley in Washington State. It was a Wednesday morning when we arrived, and the place was pretty quiet, just a few bikers here and there. It seemed like we were the only ones using the main dirt path that day. My stepdad and I spent a few hours riding around, going up and down small dirt hills. He was a few feet ahead of me when something strange happened. My bike started to slow down, and the engine began sputtering. I kept twisting the throttle, but it wouldn't speed up. Then, out of nowhere, my bike completely stopped, and I had to pull over to the side. My stepdad didn't stop or even look back, so I'm not sure if he didn't realize I had stopped, or if he just didn't want to wait for me. Either way, I was alone. I tried kick-starting the bike, but it sputtered again and wouldn't start. I kicked it again, and this time I noticed a really weird smell coming from the tailpipe, burnt and oily. Dark smoke was pouring out, and every time I tried to start the bike, it was like the engine was choking. I checked the tailpipe, thinking there might be something stuck in there, but it was clear. It didn't make sense. After a few more tries, the bike finally started, and I caught up with my stepdad. We rode around for a while longer, but the bike kept acting up, and it even stopped on me again before we headed home. When we got back, my dad went inside to use the bathroom while I started unloading the bike from the truck. I wheeled it into the garage and decided to give it a full inspection to figure out what was wrong. When I popped open the side hood to check the engine, I was shocked by what I saw. Thick brown hair was tangled all over the engine. There was smoke, and the burning smell was unbearable. I couldn't believe it. Before we left for the park, I had checked the engine, and there was no hair at all. But now, this hair was seriously wound up in the ears. It was clearly the cause of the bike trouble. It took me almost 20 minutes to pick all of it out, and I was disgusted. It wasn't just a few strands. It was clumped and tangled so badly, it looked like it had been there for a long time. Once I was done, I threw the hair away in the trash. Confused and still a little shaken, I went inside and asked my mom if she knew anything about it. Her hair was almost the same color as the one I found in the engine, so I thought maybe it was hers. But she looked at me weird and said she hadn't been near the bike at all. Her hair is short, like a guy's, and there's no way it could have gotten tangled in there. I was too tired to think about it anymore, so I went to my room and took a nap. When I woke up, it was already night, and I decided to take a shower before going to bed. As I was washing my hair, I looked down and saw something that made my heart stop. Long brown hair was sticking out of the drainage hole. Some of it was tangled around my toes, and it was so unexpected that I screamed in terror. I nearly slipped on the wet floor, rushing out of the shower, naked and wet, shaking with fear. I ran straight to my room, my mind racing. How could this be? The hair wasn't mine. I'm blonde, and my stepdad is bald. There was no explanation for it. My mom came running up the stairs, asking me what was wrong. I couldn't even look at her. I just told her nothing and went to bed, my mind spinning. I couldn't understand what had just happened, and I was terrified. The next morning, I nervously went into the bathroom to check the tub. The hair was gone. I didn't tell anyone about what happened until now, when I found this sight. I still don't have an explanation for it, and honestly, I haven't been able to shake the fear. Even now, every time I take a shower, I still feel uneasy, but I force myself to go through with it, hoping that one day I'll be able to put this behind me and move on. I moved into a new house 9 months ago to stay with a family friend while I was going to college. At first, the house seemed mostly normal, aside from a few bumps in the night, but things started to get stranger about a month ago. It all began when I was sleeping one night. My roommate, who doesn't believe in ghosts, woke me up to ask if I had turned the television on. I hadn't touched it in days. I'm not much of a TV person, so it was a completely random occurrence. The TV couldn't have been set on a timer, either, since it wasn't turning on and off at the same time every day. We shrugged it off and went back to sleep, not thinking much of it. A few days later, I was cleaning the house when I heard a woman singing. There was no radio on, and I was the only one home. At first, I thought it was coming from somewhere else, but then I realized it was coming from the basement area. I went over to the basement door and stood there for a moment, listening carefully. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement. My heart started to race. I opened the door, expecting to find someone there. But there was no one. The basement was empty. Shortly after that, I was eating lunch, trying to shake off the odd feeling, when the TV turned on again, then off, just like before. This time, I figured it wasn't a big deal, nothing too creepy, and I've always had a fascination with the paranormal. I kind of liked the idea of a ghost, as long as it wasn't harmful. But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. A woman's voice suddenly started speaking in the back bedroom. I rushed to the room, thinking maybe the TV had come on again, but it wasn't on. The room was empty. I was home alone. I called my mom to talk to her about it, just to distract myself and calm down. After that, things seemed to quiet down for a few days. But then, about a week and a half later, I was cleaning the bedrooms and waiting for a call from my friend. She had said she would call around noon, so I went on with my chores while I waited. By 1:00 p.m., I decided to check in and called her instead. When I called, she said she tried reaching me earlier and that someone had picked up the phone. She heard a TV in the background, and then the phone was hung up. I thought maybe she had dialed the wrong number. She said she'd hang up, redial, and try again. Just a few seconds later, my phone rang. I was still talking to her when I passed by the basement door and heard voices again. Curious and a bit uneasy, I went downstairs. To my surprise, the basement TV was on. Now, here's the strangest part. There's a phone in the basement because my roommate's son used to stay there, and she had put a phone in for him. I walked over to the phone and picked it up, but I was the only one in the house. Someone had answered it from the basement, and the TV had not been used in weeks. It wasn't on a timer, and the remote was sitting untouched on the shelf. At that point, I started to realize, I think a woman lives in my basement. She sings sometimes, and I can hear her walking around. It's a bit unsettling, but honestly, I don't think she means any harm. She's friendly. She has a pretty singing voice. Sometimes when I go downstairs, I talk to her, but nothing ever happens. It's only when I go back upstairs that she starts making noise again, like she's waiting for me to notice. I don't know who she is or why she's here, but I don't mind her. I like the idea of her presence, even if it's a little spooky sometimes. Ghosts don't always have to be scary, right? This story happened a long time ago in Laos, and it's one that my Aunt May, my mother's older sister, often tells. At the time, my aunt was 17, the eldest unmarried daughter in her village, which meant she was the mother figure to many of the children around her. She was responsible and nurturing, always looking after the younger kids in the neighborhood, including a boy named Sam, who was just 6 years old. Sam's parents had a troubled marriage. They fought constantly, and the violence between them was something the entire village could hear. Divorce was unthinkable in those days, so shameful that one would rather die than face it. But Sam's home life was unbearable, and my aunt took it upon herself to care for him, especially after one particularly disturbing night. It was a chilly evening when Sam showed up at her front door, shivering uncontrollably. May took him in immediately, wrapping him in a blanket and trying to warm him up. The boy told her that his parents had been arguing all night. Then there was silence, and when he looked around, he realized he was alone in the house. The houses back then weren't like the insulated homes we have now. They were simple huts made of banana leaves and twigs, the kind that let every sound travel. Everyone in the village must have heard the arguments, but no one intervened. By morning, Sam's parents still hadn't come to get him. May took him to their house to check on them, but when she knocked on the door, no one answered. She tried again, but still no response. As night fell, strange things started happening. May could hear voices coming from Sam's house. With a growing sense of unease, she decided to go next door to see what was going on. When she arrived, she kicked the door open, only to find the boy's father with another woman in his arms. May was taken aback, but she quickly apologized for intruding and explained that she was there to bring Sam home. The man barely acknowledged her and continued his embrace with the woman. It was an unsettling sight, but May didn't press further. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of Sam's mother. The boy's mother's parents came to the house demanding to see their daughter. The boy's father claimed she had run off with another man, but everyone in the village knew that wasn't the kind of woman she was. Whispers spread throughout the community, and many suspected that the father had something to do with her disappearance. Some even speculated that he had murdered her, but there was no concrete evidence to prove it. The boy's father, now living with his new bride, left the village and took the boy with him. The father didn't seem to care much for his son, leaving him in May's care. Some never once asked about his mother, didn't shed a tear for her, and didn't show any sign of sadness. May grew increasingly concerned, especially when the boy started behaving oddly. One morning, May went to pick some up from his house as usual. When the boy came out, he waved cheerfully in the direction of his father, who wasn't looking at him. Sam smiled widely and walked over to May. When she asked why he was so happy, he replied, "Mom is coming to take me away." May was confused. "Where is your mother, Sam?" she asked. The boy's smile widened, and he said, "Dad loves her a lot now. Every day he carries her on his back." May's mouth went dry. She asked again, "What do you mean, Sam? Where is she?" The boy pointed toward the house and said, "Just look at them. Aren't they happy?" May turned toward the house, expecting to see something, but all she saw was the father's back, facing away from them, while his new wife was cooking in the kitchen. There was no sign of the mother. That evening, May felt a chill she couldn't shake. Something wasn't right. Sam's behavior was unsettling, and the way he spoke of his mother seemed to indicate that something supernatural was at play. A week later, Sam mysteriously passed away. The village believed it was due to an illness that spread in the rural area, something that could have been prevented with proper medical care, but May knew the truth. She believed that his mother had finally come for him, that she had somehow found a way to take her son away from the grip of his cruel father. May was convinced that Sam's spirit was finally freed, and that his death was his mother's way of rescuing him. To this day, my aunt believes that Sam's mother came back to save him from the horrors of his father's house, and that his death was a way for her to finally reunite with him in peace. I never once heard anyone say they didn't believe in ghosts, but somehow I always felt like I was one of those people who didn't really give them much thought, until one night I had an experience that changed everything. It was around 9:00 p.m. when my husband, David, and I headed out to the barn. Our usual routine was to feed the animals around 7:00 p.m., but we had been at the kids' concert, so we were running late. David went out back to feed the bulls their night snack, and I made my way to the barn to feed the cats, a room we jokingly called the cat room. Casper, our all-white cat, was following me as I walked through the dark barn. I tried to flick on the lights, but nothing happened. Annoyed, I grabbed our lantern, the soft light barely illuminating the dusty space around me. I opened the door to the cat room and pulled out the cat food bag. Just as I bent down to fill their bowls, I felt a sudden push against me. I spun around quickly, expecting to see one of the cats, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking they were just being their usual pushy selves at feeding time. I bent back down to finish pouring the food, then went to set down their water and milk. As I stood up, another push came from behind me, this time stronger. I lost my balance but caught myself before I fell. I stood there, breathing heavily, and muttered, "Knock it off." Just then, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the noise echoed all around the barn. "Deviated!" I shouted, my voice rising in panic. I rushed to the window and saw a figure dart past outside, too quick for me to make out any details. "Deviated!" I shouted again, my heart racing. Then I heard a faint whisper, just a rustle of sound, but it sent chills down my spine. I looked out the window again, and I saw the figure again, but this time it didn't move. It just stood there, still and silent. My throat tightened as I shouted once more, "David!" I stepped out of the cat room, desperate to find my husband, when I heard another whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. My fear began to rise, and I could feel my pulse quickening. Something wasn't right. Then, as I was walking towards the door, I saw it, a shadowy, blackish-white-shaped dart past me. It brushed by, just out of my peripheral vision. I felt another push, this time on my shoulder, and I froze in place. Then, I heard a voice, a little girl's voice. "Help me! Help me!" she cried, sounding desperate. It wasn't my children's voice. None of them were in the barn, and I don't have a daughter. The voice was too clear, too real. I followed the sound, my legs moving on their own. The voice led me to a small corner of the barn, where I saw a little girl standing in front of me. She was wearing a white dress, like something from the 1800s. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. Before I could reach out, she disappeared, fading into thin air. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My mind raced, and I was overcome with a terror I couldn't explain. I ran out of the barn, my heart pounding in my chest. I found David and quickly told him what had happened. We went back into the barn together, and that's when I saw it. There, hanging from the rafters, was the ghost of the little girl, her body limp, suspended by a rope. She disappeared in an instant, vanishing into the air as if she had never been there at all. Shaken and confused, David and I did some research online the next day. We found an article that sent a cold shiver down our spines. According to the story, a little girl had been hung in our barn in the late 1900s. The picture they showed was of a girl dressed exactly like the one I had seen, the same white dress, the same fear in her eyes. Since that night, we've continued to see her, but we've learned not to fear her. We don't try to run or anger her. We simply live with her presence, knowing that she's not here to harm us. She's just a part of the barn now, and maybe, just maybe, she's looking for peace. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. This happened just last Saturday, and I've never been so freaked out in my life. It was around 2:30 p.m. when my sister came over to have lunch with me. We sat in the living room. She was facing the kitchen walkway, and I was sitting with my back to the wall. We chatted for a while, but then something happened that I couldn't explain. I saw my sister turn her head suddenly, her eyes fixed on something down the kitchen walkway. She looked uneasy, like something was bothering her, but I didn't think much of it at first because I was focused on our conversation. Her expression, though, was strange. It wasn't like she was scared, but it was definitely something I'd never seen before. The back door was open, and I realized that she had noticed. I had been cleaning the kitchen and my bedroom earlier, so I must have forgotten to close it. Normally, we never leave the back door open. It's known to be haunted, not just by us, but by the entire neighborhood. The air around that part of the house feels off. When I mentioned I was just cleaning, my sister didn't say much, but she didn't seem relieved either. She kept looking toward the kitchen walkway, her face growing more tense. Finally, she turned to me and said what she saw. She told me she saw a shadow, just the legs, walking toward my dad's room, the last room in the house. She described the legs as human, but only up to the knees. The rest of the figure was invisible. I could feel the fear creep up my spine as she spoke. That's when I realized how scared she was, and it made me terrified too. She left soon after that, and I was home alone. I turned the radio on at full volume to drown out the silence, but even the noise couldn't shake the fear that was gnawing at me. By 5 p.m., I had finished my housework, but the unease stayed with me. It was like something was watching, even though nothing else happened. Then came Sunday, and that's when things got even worse. I went out with my nephew in the afternoon. He wasn't feeling well, so I took him to the clinic. After he took his medicine, he fell asleep in the car. When we got back home around 7 p.m., I went into the kitchen to start making dinner. A few minutes passed, and suddenly, my nephew woke up screaming. It wasn't just any scream. It sounded like he was being haunted, like something was attacking him. He screamed as if his life depended on it. I rushed over to him, trying to calm him down, but his face had turned a strange, dark color. It was as though something not human, had taken hold of him. My heart raced with fear as I desperately tried to comfort him, but nothing worked. His screams filled the house, and he kept shouting, "Wait, he will show up. Wait, he will show up." My fears were beyond anything I could put into words. My father had just returned home, and together we tried everything to calm him. Nothing helped. My brother, who had just gotten married and lived a few doors down, heard the screams and rushed to our house. He quickly carried my nephew out of the room, and the screaming finally stopped when he was away from the house. We gave my nephew some water and let him relax, but I could still feel the weight of the terror in the air. I didn't know what to do next, but I immediately called a medium. I needed answers. The medium arrived quickly, and we took my nephew to see him. The medium performed some ritual, and slowly my nephew began to calm down. His face, which had been dark and twisted with fear, returned to its normal color, and he seemed to be free of whatever had taken hold of him. The medium then separated us and told us something that sent shivers down my spine. He said that there was a very dangerous demon in my house, and it had shown itself to my nephew, which was why he had screamed like that. I hadn't told the medium what my nephew had said, but somehow he knew exactly what had happened. Now I'm left with this overwhelming sense of dread. How am I supposed to live in this house after what happened? I have to go back soon, but the thought of entering that house alone fills me with terror. Every time I think about walking through that door, I can't shake the image of the dark figure, the whispers, and my nephew's screaming face. Please pray for me. I don't know how I'm going to face this. When I was in 3rd grade, I went to visit my grandmother's house. Not long before, my grandfather had passed away. Since the cemetery where he was buried was just 5 minutes away from my grandma's house, my family decided to visit his grave. We found his grave easily enough. My grandmother seemed quiet, her sadness hanging in the air, and she told us she wanted to stay there for a while, alone. My mom, siblings, and I decided to walk around the rest of the cemetery to visit other family members' graves and explore a bit. We wandered for a while, walking among the gravestones, reflecting on the lives of the people we had lost. After a while, we made our way to the more prominent section of the cemetery, where the graves were larger and more ornate. These were the graves of the wealthier families, the ones that stood out more than the others. One grave caught our attention, and we walked closer to it. The gravestone belonged to someone named Mary. There were toys scattered around the grave, dolls, a teddy bear, things that didn't quite belong in such a solemn place. As we stood there, taking it all in, I suddenly caught a faint scent in the air. "Did you smell that?" I asked, looking around. Only my mother responded, saying she did. The smell was light, but unmistakable. It was the scent of roses, but not like a perfume. It was too light for that, almost like a lingering trace, and it was gone as quickly as it had come. We stood there, puzzled, for a moment longer, waiting for my grandmother to join us. When she arrived, we told her about the strange smell. She listened quietly before sharing the story behind the grave. The grave belonged to a little girl named Mary. She was only 13 years old when she passed away, but she was known for being kind and good-hearted. She had always dreamed of becoming a nun. People said that she always wore rose perfume, no matter where she went, and when she fell ill and passed away, it was said that whenever you smelled the scent of roses, it would heal you. As my grandmother spoke, I felt a chill run through me. I looked down at the toys surrounding the grave again, and the air felt heavier somehow. It was as if something was watching us, lingering in that quiet corner of the cemetery. The faint rose scents seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, I almost felt like the little girl, Mary, was still there with us, watching over the grave. To this day, I can still remember that strange smell of roses, faint and fleeting, and how it seemed to fill the air around Mary's grave. I'd never been able to explain it, but I've always felt that there was something special or even spiritual about that place. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe the scent of roses really could heal you. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.